Chapter 331. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. It seemed to be never-ending. Huaishe finally knew where the water vapor evaporated from the terrible drought a few days ago went. But with this never-ending snowstorm, the temperature became colder and colder. In the end, the thin layer of fur on Fu Yi's body was no longer useful. Left with no other choice, Huaishe caught a few roe deers, skinned them, and tanned them crudely with the molten iron that she was especially good at. Fu Yi quickly used her psychokinesis and spikes to sew a few crooked leather jackets for herself and put them on. Like a ball. Huaishe didn't dare to say this sentence out loud. The temperature was getting lower and lower, and the snow was getting heavier and heavier. It seemed to be never-ending, and everything was white. They walked forward against the blizzard for 2 days, tirelessly. The main reason was that Huaishe didn't know fatigue. Anyway, his teeth were so good that he could eat anything. When he was thirsty, he drank water. When he was hungry, he hunted. If he couldn't hunt, he might as well eat soil. And the terrifying body temperature completely resisted the cold outside. His mobility wasn't affected much at all. Just like this, they walked forward for 2 days. However, when he looked forward and backward, all he could see through the dense snowflakes was a vast snowfield. It was lonely, as if they were abandoned by the world. When the sky darkened, Huaishe rammed the snake's spine iron stake pulled by his tail into the ground. After piling some trees nearby, he skillfully spat on them, and a raging fire burned vigorously. Light heating equals fire. Fire plus song equals me. If I add you to the song, the temperature will increase even more. Singing a bunch of old songs, Huaishe dug a deep hole and piled some snow into it. She spat out some phlegm and boiled some hot water. After a tiring day, she began to soak her feet and rest. Well, it was hard to say whether it was useful to soak his feet in this body now. Fu Yi used her spikes to pick up the meat stored in her bound space. She repeatedly roasted the frozen meat over the fire and couldn't help but sigh. I want to drink a bowl of hot soup. Yes, I want to sleep on a big, soft bed. Huaishe also soaked her tail in the water, stirred it twice with satisfaction, and let out a long sigh. I still want to play games. Uncle Feng's supper will be ready by the time I finish the game. After supper, I'll continue to play games. After playing games, I can sleep. Fu Yi sighed listlessly. I just want to eat some barbecued meat. Then hurry up and sleep. Huaishe shook his head. You can have everything in your dreams. Or you can just press the safe exit button. Your parents will definitely satisfy you then. You're just thinking of ways to not bring me along, right? Fu Yi rolled her eyes. You're so annoying. Huaishe didn't say anything. He seemed to have fallen asleep in the hot water. This guy, wasn't he afraid of catching a cold? Was he really possessed by a husky? No, according to Fu Yi's conjecture these days, it wasn't that she would become whatever she became, but that she would become whatever she originally looked like. So, was she a hedgehog? And Huaishe was a husky? To a certain extent, it was quite appropriate. Fu Yi sighed. She turned around and was about to tell him to be careful. He didn't want to be frozen in the hole he dug after sleeping for a while like yesterday. But when she turned around, she froze in place. Behind her, there was no hot pool, nor was there any sign of the giant beast. Huaishe was gone. Huh! She was stunned for a long time, but soon reacted. She fully activated her psychokinesis and radiated it in all directions. Then, she looked down at her map plug-in. Huaishe, where did you go? No one responded. Huaishe. She shouted and looked around, but when she turned around again, the fire behind her had disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never been there. In the dead silence, only the wind and snow danced in the sky. But the violent wind seemed to gradually slow down. As countless snowflakes rustled down, the scene dozens of steps away finally revealed. A wooden house suddenly appeared in front of her. Soft light shone from the small wooden house, and smoke with a strong fragrance slowly rose from the chimney. A warm breath was close at hand. Fu-Yi was stunned. Amidst the silence, the door was slowly pushed open with a creak. An elderly woman wearing an apron and looking at Fu-Yi with a gentle and genial expression appeared on her face. She had a slightly plump figure, a kind face, and 6 long whiskers hanging down from her mouth. She looked like a chubby old cat. "Is it another lost child?" She smiled and waved at Fu-Yi. "Come in and warm yourself up. I just made soup." Fu-Yi was silent for a moment and shook her head. The stoat's psychokinesis suddenly trembled, carrying her into the sky and flying into the distance. Only a crazy person would go to such a place where they knew there was a ghost, right? But when she landed on the ground, exhausted, she looked back and saw the warm wooden house that didn't seem to have moved at all. And the old woman standing quietly at the door, waiting in the wind and snow. "Come in, child." She smiled. "I made hot soup." Fu-Yi fled in panic, but the warm light chased after her from beginning to end, like a maggot in a tarsal bone, slowly approaching. In the end, Fu-Yi had no strength to run anymore. She fell in the snow. When she looked back, she saw the old woman on the steps smiling gently. The cat kitchen girl suggested again. "The stew is ready just now. If you don't mind, how about eating together?" In the long silence, Fu-Yi closed her eyes, moved her consciousness away from the red safe exit icon for the last time, and opened her eyes. She said, "Okay." Huaisher felt that he was lost in the blizzard. Suddenly, the sky and earth turned and Fu-Yi disappeared. He was thrown into a deep pit, and it was difficult for him to jump out of the hundreds of meters high cliff. When he looked back, he smelled the stench from the depths of the darkness. Muffled footsteps could be heard. It was accompanied by the low growls of the beast. Soon, 2 behemoths walked out of the opened crack. Their amber vertical pupils looked at Huaisher with natural ferocity. They opened their mouths, and hot iron liquid dripped from the corners of their mouth. Huaisher was stunned for a long time. He suspected that he was looking at a mirror, because the 2 behemoths looked exactly the same as him. There was no difference. "Tisk," Huaisher narrowed his eyes, looked at them, and suddenly asked, "Are you going to say that everything from your body to your personality is exactly the same as mine?" "Exactly." The 2 mirror-like behemoths responded. Their voices overlapped, but if one listened carefully, it didn't sound like 1 or 2 voices, but more like dozens of voices overlap. "That's great," Huaisher grinned, moved his body, and asked in a low voice, "That is to say, you know what I'm thinking now?" So, the 2 wolf beasts showed a strange smile. The wind and snow came suddenly. It covered everything. In the wooden house, the fire in the fireplace burned fiercely. The stew hanging above the fire made a boiling sound, and a sweet smell of meat rose. With the stirring of the spoon, it spread to the surroundings. Fu-Yi sat at the cozy dining table and looked around. Oil lamp, table, chairs, and cutlery. Everything seemed to be built according to her taste and taste. She liked it from the bottom of her heart. Even if she knew it was strange, she didn't want to blame this cute outfit. There was only a faint sound that kept ringing out, as if someone was whispering something. The oil lamp said, "She's looking at me. My arm is itchy, can I scratch it?" "Don't move, you're the oil lamp." The table reprimanded in a low voice. "Can't you hold on a little longer? What if you expose yourself?" "Shut up." The tapestry interrupted their whispers. "She seems to have heard us." "Yes, don't talk." The vase interrupted, showing her presence. The oil lamp was angry. "Then what are you doing, farting?" "Enough!" The cupboard jumped angrily. "Shut up, all of you, don't talk." "She's looking at us." The whispers died away. Soon, steaming hot stew, roasted steak that was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, and even fragrant, delicious, sour, spicy, and appetizing sauces were placed in front of Fu-Yi along with a huge wooden plate. "Please eat, child." The cat chef raised her meaty paw and touched the stoat's head. "Don't be shy, you must be hungry, right?" "I'm hungry, yes." Fu Yi looked around and compared it with the emergency rescue handbook from hell that her father forced her to memorize when she was young. She had already seen through the surface. But isn't all of this fake? She picked up the fork roughly and stabbed a piece of meat. She raised it, activated her psychokinesis, and tore it. The piece of stew dripping with gravy disappeared like bubbles. Are you treating me to a meal, or am I treating you to a meal? Fu Yi looked at the cat chef coldly. My friends and I, to you, are just food, right? The cat chef looked at her blankly for a long time. She sighed helplessly, pulled out a chair and sat opposite her. After serving herself a bowl of stew, she looked up and asked, Do you mind if I talk while eating? Do I have the power to resist? Fu Yi asked indifferently. She didn't pounce on him like he had expected. Instead, she picked up her fork and tasted her stew. She was graceful and her movements were gentle. Relax, child, no one here wants to eat you. The cat chef looked up at the nervous stoat. Do you think we are the kind of barbaric creatures that will eat living things? Then why did you catch me and bring me here? You broke in, didn't you? The cat chef smiled helplessly. And we just want to save you. Chapter 332. Fu Yi felt like she had just heard a joke. But this joke was not funny at all. She was caught and brought here just to save herself? Nothing could be more comical than such words. Have you ever thought about it, child? When the delicious meal was over, the cat chef wiped the corner of her mouth and spread her paws on the table. She asked solemnly, Thinking makes one wise, but thinking also makes one painful. But if you don't think, you can only fall into ignorance forever, becoming a monster without knowing it. Fu Yi frowned. Won't you be if you think about it? After thinking about it, you will know that you have become a monster, just like us. The cat chef shook her head as if she was mocking herself. The more you think, the more fearful you are. Fearful of our future, fearful of the coming of the end. She said, fearful of death. When the destined destruction comes, what choice will you make? Will you seek survival at all costs, or will you give up all struggle and beg for mercy from the heavens? Or will you resist without knowing your own strength? Around the cat chef, there seemed to be countless voices overlapping as they asked solemnly, Have you ever thought about the future, child? Your future? In this dark world, is there any light in your future? Will you welcome death one day in the future? We have thought about it, the cat chef said. Then we came to a conclusion. Finally, we came here. Now we are here to welcome you. She said, It is that simple. Fu Yi shook her head. To be honest, I don't see any connection between your conclusion and the illusion in front of me. This is the answer and result we have thought about. The cat chef knocked on the table. Then, the snowstorm outside the window suddenly stopped. Then, the sun shone brightly, and countless exotic flowers and plants grew from the fertile land. Colorful phantoms kept flashing outside the window and inside the house. From time to time, there were curious eyes peeking inside. They seemed to be young men, young girls, old people, or none of them. Thousands of cats squatted on the trees, on the ground, on the beams, on the tables, on the chairs, and even next to Fu Yi. They poked their heads out and looked carefully at the outsiders. They called out to her in a friendly manner, and some of them even went up to her and rubbed against her, wanting to play with her. Fu Yi floated up in a fluster and isolated the cat. She turned around and looked at the cat chef. These are all illusions, right? That's right. All the cats spoke in unison. What you see are the actions and results of our species' efforts to deal with the apocalypse, the shelter within the void. Since death is unstoppable, we can postpone it indefinitely, until the future that is destined to usher in extinction, we can be redeemed and rested in an eternity of time. And now, what we want to do is to share this peace with you. Outsiders, don't be attached to the outside world that is destined to sink into destruction. Why don't you stay here? Stay in this fantasy land that can satisfy all your desires? Fu Yi fell silent. She could instinctively feel the sincerity in their words, and she could also feel the fear of Doomsday that was inherited in her body's bloodline. This world was about to be destroyed. There was no doubt about it. If they didn't hide it from him, then it was indeed their good intentions to pull him and Lin Sanjiu into it. In this cruel world, what could be more precious than the happiness and peace before death? After a long silence, she suddenly asked, "What if I refuse?" A white cat said, "Then it means you haven't understood." The black cat said, "Maybe you just haven't understood." The tabby cat tilted its head. "What's wrong with being here?" "You have to eat and sleep outside." We said, "You have to endure hunger and pain, but there is no sorrow or despair here." The Persian cat looked up. "There is no difference between reality and illusion. The apocalypse will never come." The calf of the tabby cat passed by her and looked up at her. "Before the apocalypse, we can all die in happiness and peace. You're just obsessed with the outside world." The cat chef, who was as kind as a grandmother, picked up the calf and put it in her arms. "Want to make a bet?" "What bet?" "Let us prove to you that the outside world is no different from the inside of the sanctuary." The cat chef said, "There is everything here. No matter what kind of life you want to live or what kind of things you want to have, you can get them. We will prove this to you." "How?" Fu Yi frowned. "Make a wish, child." All the cats said in unison, "We can fulfill your wish, any wish. You have 3 chances to ask us for what you want. If there is anything you know and have that we can't achieve or obtain, then the sanctuary's existence is unnecessary to you. If you can't get the happiness and peace you want here, you can take your friends and leave." They paused for a moment. Then, the cat chef said seriously, "But if you can't find anything here that can satisfy you, please stay here. Let's be friends. We will get along very well." Fu Yi didn't say anything. She didn't know how to respond. It was true that this was an illusion, but the illusion was too real. Even time seemed to be able to accelerate, and she could realize any dream and desire. She did have a way to leave, but it was equivalent to leaving Huai Shi here alone. If she still wanted to continue exploring in the Night of the Witch, then she had to win this bet. Otherwise, she could only stay here and dream for the rest of the time. To be honest, she didn't think there was anything wrong with dreaming. Being friends with a group of cats also seemed interesting. But as expected, she still felt that it was more interesting to go on an adventure with Huai Shi. Therefore, she had to win. Then, what did she have in the outside world that she couldn't get here? Even if she didn't know the details of the Ascended and Hell, she knew that at this time, she couldn't ask for anything material. Material was the most demanding thing, but in the illusion, material became the simplest thing. Maybe she could try to lie. But was there really no way for them to know what she was thinking? She thought for a long time and suddenly made her first wish. "I want to be free." All the cats stared at her silently, unmoved. Only the grandmother cat chef looked at her with pity, as if she already knew what she was thinking, and asked softly, "That kind of thing, when you were outside, did you have it?" Fu Yi was silent. Did she have it? She didn't know. Whether it was her father's steel cradle, or her mother's control and planning of her life in between, how much of it belonged to Fu Yi? She didn't answer. She didn't have such a luxury outside the dream of the Night of the Witch. After a long time, she lowered her head dejectedly and sighed deeply. Then, she made her second wish. "Friends." She looked up and said, "I don't have any friends here." "Actually, your friend is here too." The cat chef said gently, "Do you want to see him?" Fu Yi smiled as if she understood something. "I thought you would say that you are my friends too." "Friendship is mutual, isn't it?" The cat chef said warmly, "We do want to be friends with you, but I'm afraid that you can't trust us at this moment, right?" Fu Yi let out a long sigh. A big stone was lifted from her heart. Huai Shi was still here. At least he didn't run away or get kidnapped by something. In fact, Fu Yi suspected that as long as these cats pretended to be her, and with a little guidance, Huai Shi would jump into the trap with the bone in his mouth. I'll say in advance, this is not my last wish. Fu Yi raised her hand and asked, "Can I see him?" "Of course." The cat chef nodded, and then showed a somewhat awkward expression, "But he seems to be busy. I'm afraid he can't take care of you for a while." "I'm not lying. You'll know when you see him." She waved her hand and pushed open the window. There was no snowstorm outside the window. The cats on the trees and in the grass disappeared silently, replaced by a familiar scene of ice and snow. In the deep pit, 3 huge wolf beasts were fighting fiercely and had reached the most dangerous moment. Roars came one after another. "Pair 7. Pair 9. Can't afford it. Bomb! My king bomb!" As he threw the iron card on the ground, Huaisher jumped up from the ground and laughed proudly. "I won again! F*ck, what luck! Are you F*king cheating?" The other 2 wolf beasts, whose faces were covered with tinfoil strips, looked at Huaisher suspiciously, but couldn't find any evidence against him. "If you don't catch me, then it's not cheating." Huaisher whistled and rubbed a long piece of tinfoil out again. He spat on it and threw it on the faces of the 2 wolf beasts, sighing, "You guys are still too young." Huaisher's card skills could only be said to be average. However, he used to play poker with Crow in the basement when he was free after training. After such a long time, his card skills hadn't improved at all, but his experience and ability to cheat were getting better and better day by day. Even if the 2 wolf beasts copied Huaisher's personality, physical fitness, and even short-term memory, how could they copy the experience and instincts that he gained from cheating Crow? Continue, there's still one more round. Huaisher took the lead to shuffle the cards. "You can't go back on your words. If I win this round, you have to let me and my brother go. Hurry up, let's play a few more rounds. Anyway, aren't you quite free?" The 2 brothers happily shuffled the cards and someone suggested, "Hey, do you want some supper? You must be hungry. We have some crispy meat and edamame here, they can go with wine." In the dead silence, Fu Yi stared at the scene outside the window in disbelief. "You're really something, Huaisher. I tried my best to save you. How did you reach an agreement with the criminals so quickly?" Cat Chef smiled and looked at the scene outside the window, then turned back to look at Fu Yi. "Maybe you can wait for a while and watch them play Fight the Landlord, forget it." Fu Yi sighed sadly. "Won't it be too embarrassing to win by playing Fight the Landlord?" Cat Chef smiled, closed the window, and asked solemnly, "Then, have you thought of your last wish?" Fu Yi nodded. Chapter 333. In the silence, the cat chef quietly studied the girl in front of her. After a long time, she took off the round-framed glasses on her face, seemingly helpless. "Have you really thought it through, child?" she said. "The so-called gamble is just to let you know and understand that there is no difference between here and the outside world. Is there really something in the outside world that is so full of disasters that you are reluctant to part with?" "Yes." Fu Yi nodded resolutely. The cat chef asked again, "Even if you have to bet the possibility of staying here forever, you still want to leave at all costs?" "Yes." The girl nodded again. "It's so sad. You remind me of many of our companions and clansmen." The old cat grandmother sighed and stroked the kitten in her hand. "They are all like you. They did not hesitate to break with us just to run to hell to seek death. It's too unbelievable. Life is precious. It shouldn't be like this." "I understand," Fu Yi said. "Even so, you still want to go?" "Yes." "Even if you have no chance of winning at all?" "No, this is the only thing I won't agree with." Fu Yi smiled happily. "I will definitely win this gamble." All the cats fell into silence. They solemnly studied the girl in front of them, waiting for her request. "Please, child," the cat chef said, "tell us your last wish." "Then, please tell me." Fu Yi took a deep breath and asked solemnly, "Can I get love here?" No one responded. All the cats were silent. They looked at her quietly, or at each other in astonishment. Finally, their gazes fell on the old grandmother. The grandmother was silent. Fu Yi's smile became more and more cheerful. What I want is what I have in the outside world. And you can't give it to me, right? The grandmother did not refute. Fu Yi asked again, like friendship, love is also mutual, right? Yes. The grandmother nodded. Fu Yi was relieved. She took a deep breath and asked the last question. So you can't give it to me, right? The grandmother pondered for a moment and suddenly said, You can try. As if in a trance, Huai sure couldn't help but yawn in the midst of the intense card battle. He was sleepy. Like an illusion, he heard a familiar and sweet voice beside him. Huai sure, I like you. Brother, stop messing around. Subconsciously, he pushed to the side, but he pushed empty air. He was stunned for a moment. Amazing. He actually heard his good brother confess to him. Where did this adolescent hallucination come from? What happened? The wolf beast at the side urged, Hurry up and fight. I've been waiting for so long that even the flowers have withered. Ha 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 ha, what are you ha? Huai sure swung his hand and threw the 2 kings onto the pile of cards. What do you have that's bigger than me? I won. You guys are going to lose even your underwear to me, okay? The 2 single dogs, whose faces were covered in foil, cursed and threw their bad cards on the ground. He had lost completely. In the room, in the awkward silence, the old woman hesitated and said, I can guide him. Love always needs some time to develop, right? But this isn't from you guys, right? Fu Yi smiled. Love is mutual, but it's different from friendship. There can't be a third person in it. The old cat chef couldn't help but lower her head and sigh dejectedly. Then, she heard a voice outside the door. She won. As if waiting outside the door for a long time, the old man who stopped here made his final judgment and left with weak footsteps. The cat chef nodded. Although it was a pity, she still accepted the loss of the bet and lowered her head to comfort the sad kitten in her arms. Fu Yi's tense body finally relaxed and she let out a long breath. Immediately she was puzzled. Why didn't you lie to me? The old chef didn't understand. I mean, this kind of rule is completely free of choice, right? Fu Yi said, Love is an illusory thing. As long as we twist our rules a little, it's easy to realize. Isn't it easy to create a fake person? The cat chef smiled bitterly and shook her head. If that's the case, wouldn't we be lying to you? Fu Yi was stunned. We just want you to stay here and be friends with us, she said seriously. Before the destruction comes, everyone can be happy together. There will be no betrayal, no harm, and no suspicion of each other. After all, this is a shelter, not a prison, isn't it? She smiled kindly and raised her furry hand to touch the stoat's little ears. Child, lying can't be exchanged for sincerity or friendship. The old chef reminded her seriously, You can't hide it either. Fu Yi was stunned. She looked away a little evasively. I know, she whispered. I just need some time, then wait patiently. The old chef finally smiled gently. Before the end comes, we all have enough time to wait and love. Her figure slowly dissipated. Along with many disappointed cat. The warm light of the wooden hut slowly extinguished, as if it had sunk into the distant darkness and left her. Fu Yi returned to the cold snow, but the snowstorm had stopped. The sky was clear and the air was fresh. On the table in front of her, there was a steaming pot of stew and 2 bowls and chopstick. A white crystal was pressed on a note. On the note, there was a drawing of a smiling face that resembled an old grandmother, and a line of handwriting. Before the end of the wait, please share it with your friends. Fu Yi was stunned for a long time. She couldn't help but sniff the warm stew in front of her. She couldn't help but laugh. What? You're still so gentle to us in the end? She was silent for a long time. She turned back and looked at a certain husky lying in the snow, drooling. Her expression became angry and helpless. A snowball the size of a football hit his face. Huai Sure was startled and looked around vigilantly. What's wrong? Where's the enemy? Fu Yi, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Thinking of this guy reaching a consensus with the enemy, Fu Yi couldn't help but get angry. Protect my ass. What are you waiting for? Come and eat. Why is there food? It smells so good. Why do you care so much? Just eat. Don't use your mouth, okay? It's going to fall over. Forget it, I'll scoop it for you. The stoat sighed and waved his hand, activating his telekinesis. While he was at it, he quietly hid the note in his space. Wait. Her mood became heavy again. She wouldn't be able to wait with this guy until the end of the world, right? Forget it, let's eat first. She picked up the small bowl and took a bite of the fresh and juicy beef. She narrowed her eyes in satisfaction. Delicious. There was a disappointing voice next to her. The meal was finished quickly. After all, the bowl was so big that it wasn't enough to fill the gaps between Huaishi's teeth, but the taste was really good. The steaming hot food warmed her heart after eating. Then, Huaishi finally noticed the white crystal in Fu Yi's hand. Where did you get it? He leaned over and widened his eyes. It's shiny and beautiful. He wanted to eat it. He had gotten used to eating it these days. Go away, someone gave it to me. Why are you licking it? Fu Yi took the crystal away, not letting Huaishi continue licking it. But for some reason, with the crystal in her hand, she felt her heart beat faster. Her breathing was rapid. Very quickly, the white crystal actually emitted a faint light and fused into her body. Wow, you're eating it yourself and not giving me a bite? Huaishi was surprised. Then, he saw Fu Yi stagger back as if drunk and sit on the ground dizzily. I seem a little, she said, sleepy. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Immediately after, the layer of fine white fur on her body began to grow crazily, wrapping around her and turning her into something like a cocoon. Huaishi rubbed his nose in astonishment. He was hesitating whether to burn this thing with a mouthful of molten iron and save Fu Yi. But when he thought about it, there was no F***king function to block friendly fire. What if he accidentally burned Fu Yi to death? After he went out, he would be eagerly entertained by the good brothers of the Social Security Bureau with thermite, flamethrowers, and napalm bombs. Just as he was hesitating, the cocoon had already fallen apart. Fu Yi, who seemed to have been reborn, opened her eyes. When she saw Huaishi open his mouth, she subconsciously raised her hand and sealed his mouth. If he said something like, "You're shedding fur" or "You're bald," Fu Yi wouldn't be able to take it. Her teeth closed with a crunch. Fu Yi was scared. Huaishi's mouth was really sealed by her psychokinesis. It was like an iron clamp, unable to open it. It wasn't until she reacted and released the clamp that Huaishi was stunned. Why did you become transparent? At this moment, Fu Yi noticed that her body seemed to have really become a little transparent. It seemed that the transparency of the Photoshop layer was wrong and pulled up a little, so she could actually vaguely see the color of the soil behind her body. Other than this? Huaishi asked curiously. What else can it be? Let me see. Fu Yi opened the plug-in and hurriedly searched. Soon, Fu Yi's voice sounded in Huaishi's mind. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Wow. I can't move in human form. Huaishi sighed. You don't even have to pay the phone bill. You can shut up. Encountering such a killjoy, he could make all the good stuff seem worthless. Other than this, is there anything else? Huaishi asked. No, what else do you want? Fu Yi turned around and rolled her eyes at him. It's good enough that there's something. Okay, Huaishi lost the opportunity to see something strange and shook his head resentfully. Then let's go. Okay, let's go. Fu Yi jumped up and skillfully flew to his back. Attack, Huaishi, attack. For some reason, Huaishi suddenly felt that Fu Yi was quite cute just now. It must be an illusion. His good brother was so ruthless, he must be thinking too much. So, Huaishi grinned and ran forward with his tongue hanging out. On his back, Fu Yi couldn't help but sigh. She took one last look at the interface and looked away. This was the only new skill that Huaishi didn't tell her. Psychological suggestion. It didn't seem to work at all. She sighed, weakly fell on her back, and fell asleep. Behind them, in the depths of the forest, an illusory wooden house faintly appeared from the air. It quietly watched them go away. Go to the king's city, outsiders. The things you desire are all there. The cat chef whispered goodbye. I hope that after you leave this short dream, you can face this cruel world. Chapter 334. Along the way, they seemed to have finally entered the interior of the country of fog. After breaking through the snowstorm outside, there was no fog inside, but the sky was gray regardless of day or night. It was difficult to see the sun or the stars. Is it because it's called the country of fog? Huaisher was curious. Why not call it the country of yarn? It's more appropriate. I feel that if it's called the country of yarn, that Suchikage will die again. Don't play with homonyms, okay? Huaisher sighed and looked around. There were ruins everywhere. He originally thought that he could play the role of a little monster and scare the innocent residents. As a result, there were many cities and villages along the way, but there was not a single living person. It seemed that there had been a war or something else. There were ruins everywhere and no one was there. They saw a lot of dead people. Whether it was rotten things or corpses that had been hung on the collapsed city walls and turned into stinking bacon, they were not the appearance that humans could have. Instead, they were more like some kind of humanoid hybrid of lizard and snake, and most of them had extremely serious distortion and mutation. As for the other strange beasts and creatures, they were almost used to it. There were too many. There was one every few steps. If it weren't for Huaisher's body still having some deterrence, and Fu Yi's wide area illusion, they didn't know how much trouble they would have encountered along the way. Now it was basically Huaisher rushing, Fu Yi sleeping, waking Fu Yi up when there was trouble, activating the illusion and rushing a wave, and after that, Fu Yi went back to sleep to recover her mana. She was getting fatter and fatter. But Huaisher didn't dare to say it. How long has it been since we came in? Fu Yi lay in the basket under Huaisher's neck and asked in boredom. It should be 2 or 3 weeks, right? If it's counted by days, it's been more than half a month. Huaisher replied, but my body sense should only last for a week, and the real time is definitely not more than 8 hours. The witch's night could only last for 8 hours. Although they didn't know what kind of law and distance was used, there was no doubt that the time here was accelerated. It sounded incredible, but it was actually the case. It was like a special setting in a novel. You just have to get used to it. After so many years, in the present realm, in the framework established by the Creator one after another, time had become something that could be easily manipulated. This was especially true after several upgrades, including the theory of relativity, and other related plugins. As long as there was enough origin substance to operate, the flow of time in an enclosed space could be fast or slow to a shocking degree. The only regrettable thing was that even though the fast-forward function had been installed for so long, the fast-rewind function was still far away. Even the pause function was so difficult to operate that the creator of the physics specialty would explode his brain. Research in this field was too dangerous and had been completely sealed by the Academy of Astronomy from the source of the Silver Sea. In the end, to some extent, the loss of entropy was not irreversible. It just depended on how much one had to pay. Even if it was a small-scale time reversal, it was still a terrifying consumption that would deepen the depth of the entire reality. Of course, there were rumors that this technology had been abused by yesterday's Express. Some people also said that the Rainbow Bridge, one of the 3 major blockades in the present realm, could not only teleport people back in time, but could even teleport people back a month or something. No one would believe this kind of sensationalist nonsense. It made people want to laugh when they heard it. Ha ha! Huaisher laughed. Fu Yi raised her head and looked at him. What are you laughing at? Huaisher pondered for a moment and replied dryly, I remembered something happy. What happy thing? Huaishur certainly couldn't talk about the secrets that Crow had told him in private. He could only say after a long pause, "Someone's wife is going to have a baby." "What a coincidence, my mother is also going to have a baby." Fu Yi asked curiously, "Do you think we are talking about the same person?" Sorry. Huaishur could only bow his head and admit his mistake. "It's okay, I'm joking." Fu Yi glanced at him and responded lightly. She was not angry and just retracted back into the basket. "Be careful, it's going to rain." As if to prove her speculation, there was a sudden thunder in the sky. At dusk, the dim light of the setting sun couldn't be seen. Instead, the sky was quickly covered by dark clouds. Then, a stinky rainstorm quickly poured down. It fell on the ground with a sizzling sound. The concentration is terrifying to this extent. If it was in the present realm, all the acid rain would cry out, right? Huaishur raised his eyes and looked at the dark sky in the distance. The acid rain fell on his carapace and scales as if it had fallen on a stone. After leaving faint traces, it was shaken off without a trace. It had no effect. Since entering here, Huaishur's body had grown bigger. Now, it had surpassed the size of an ambulance and was approaching the size of a small truck. If it continued to grow, it wouldn't be the same size as a heavy truck one day, right? Huaishur would occasionally think about this when he was eating. Then, he seriously considered dieting for a few seconds and quickly threw it to the back of his mind. F***ck, I'll get bigger if I get bigger. Sponsored partnerships are more important. He opened his mouth and took a mouthful of rainwater that was like a strong acid. After rinsing his mouth and washing away the stains on his teeth, he skillfully spat it out casually. This was the good thing about having a high physique. He was immune to all poisons and attacks of any attribute were not weak. Although his health bar was thick enough and his defense was high enough, his arms and legs were short and he didn't have much control. However, the advantage of being able to travel in the rain like now was something that other explorers didn't have. In the past 2 days, when he was free, he had replaced Fu Yi's bamboo basket with an iron one and hung it around his neck with the lock of sorrow. It was clearly the size of a basketball, but hanging around his neck was like a small bell with an opening at the top. Well, it was becoming more and more like a dog. Just as he was lost in his imagination, his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. He stopped in front of the abyss. The mud and acid rain converged into a turbid current that flowed past his feet and fell into a huge crack that had inexplicably appeared in the ground. The crack was thousands of meters long, and the narrowest part was hundreds of meters wide. It was as if a violent earthquake had occurred, and the Earth's crust had undergone violent changes. He could vaguely see the ancient city that had been half submerged in mud at the bottom of the trench. The dried bones slowly rose and fell in the acid rain and turbid flow, and soon sank into the depths of the mud. That's great. We don't even need a mass cemetery. Huaishur clicked his tongue inside. How do you make such a horrifying scene sound like a market? Fu Yi sighed. Of course it's through talent. Huaishur's wolf mouth skillfully curled up and whistled proudly. I'm super brave. What's there to be afraid of? Is that so? The stoat in the bell basket said expressionlessly, then look back. Then Huaishur took a step back and rushed straight forward. You step. Look back for what? As early as when Fu Yi said to look back, Huaishur felt a premonition of death suddenly erupt in his heart, piercing his soul to the point that it trembled. Regardless of everything, he rushed forward with all his strength. Risking falling into the abyss of the crack, he ran wildly out. There was a roar. As if a small bubble had burst out, a crisp sound was drowned out by the sound of the torrential rain. Then, the acid rain was lifted, as if a door had suddenly opened between the curtains. It was pushed to the sides by the repulsion of psychokinesis. The psychokinesis rolled up a hurricane and applied to Huaishur's body, providing him with instant acceleration. The giant wolf had already dragged a section of the iron pillar, broke through the air, leaped through the crack in the air, and jumped out to the other side. Vaguely, he felt as if something had touched his hind leg. It was cold to the bone, and then the pain that went deep into the bone suddenly erupted. His body suddenly twitched, and his center of gravity was unstable. He almost fell into the abyss. Step! Fu Yi's roar exploded in his ears. Huai Shi had no doubts. His front paw slapped down in the void, as if he had slapped on a rock, and was lifted up by psychokinesis. He finally staggered and landed on the other side of the crack. What was shocking was that after leaving the other side of the crack, the torrential rain also magically disappeared. They could even see the remnants of the setting sun here. The air was dry and the ground was solid. At this moment, Huai Shi felt the phantom pain on his hind leg slowly dissipate. He panted violently, and saliva fell from his mouth. He asked blankly, "What's going on?" "I was going to ask you what's going on." The stoat holding the sharp horn on his forehead lowered its head and looked into his eyes, unable to contain its anger. "Why didn't you respond to me no matter how I called you? If it weren't for the last jump, we would be dead." I heard you tell me to look back," Huai Shi panted in fear, and felt the chill on his back finally dissipate. If it weren't for the premonition of death that saved his life, and Huai Shi's rich experience in seeking death, he was afraid that this time he would have died inexplicably. Compared to the power of the hand of confinement, he was afraid that this was the golden finger that Crow had painstakingly stuffed into him. Without this skill, he was afraid that he would have died many times over. Fu Yi stared at him for a long time, as if finally confirming that the person in this shell was the real him, and finally let out a sigh of relief. "You can look back now." Huai Shi had the courage to look back at this moment. Across the gray rainstorm and the crack that was like a natural chasm, Huai Shi caught a glimpse of the original situation on the other side of the crack. Countless figures with blurry faces were suspended in the air, standing on the ground, and even the broken limbs and distorted faces poked out of the soil. When they gathered together, the dark color was like a tide, swallowing everything with the torrential rain. Across the distance, they stared straight at the two living people who had escaped from their hand. Even if it was difficult to see their faces, he could still feel the pure hunger and jealousy. In the deepest part of the crack, in the ruins of the city that sank into the mud and darkness, there was a dark and slender hand that slowly retracted. It swayed like seaweed. Huai Shi looked down at his hind leg, and a pale white palm print had yet to fade. Under the erosion of the acid rain, the carapace there had actually softened like mud and flowed away, leaving only a palm-sized gap, exposing the grayish-black skin. Under the corrosion of the remaining strong acid, it brought a dull pain. "What exactly is that?" Fu Yi asked with lingering fear. "I guess that group of damn things don't even know what they are?" After a long time, Huai Shi withdrew his gaze from the group of dark figures bound in the torrential rain and sighed softly. "Generally speaking, let's just treat those things as part of hell." The so-called hell was such a strange place. Chapter 335. After leaving the fissure, Fu Yi didn't seem to be scared anymore and didn't ask any more questions. Huai Shi also fell into silence. The depth here was beginning to deepen. Originally, it was just a slightly abnormal border, but now it had begun to draw closer to the abyss. The group of ghosts and the things that were poked out of the sunken city were the best proof. If Huai Shi's reaction was a little slower, or without Fu Yi's help, he might have been eroded by those things and left forever in the rainstorm, or pulled closer to the sunken city. No matter how powerful an ascender was, once they made a mistake, they would usher in tragic consequences. The so-called hell was such an unreasonable place. The deeper one went, the more dangerous it was. The more unreasonable things there were, the stranger it was, or rather, the more miraculous it was. Wasn't the so-called divine mark a miracle that had transformed from hell? Even if it was the archaeological team of the Astronomical Association, there were many experienced and cautious archaeologists. It wasn't surprising or strange for them to be defeated in some strange hell ruins. And the many relics at the border were the embodiment of these disasters, strangeness and ominous. If it wasn't for the great Zarathustra seal, the present realm wouldn't even be able to maintain a day of peace under the erosion of hell. This huge secret ritual, which was completed by the continuous inheritance of many creators, not only wrote various laws and rules into the present realm, but it also maintained an absolute power advantage in the present realm with a torrent of steel. In addition, like a city wall, it formed a barrier to resist deep erosion. Among the three major blockades of the present realm, other than the Bifrost that would only be fully activated during an emergency and was usually used as a means of transportation, the one that made the greatest contribution during a stable period was the Great Zarathustra Conclave itself. As for the last of the three seals, it was a secret among secrets. Except for the higher-ups of the Astronomical Association, not even a word of it was spread out. However, Huai once heard an unexpected sneer from the crow when they were chatting. It seemed to be regarded as an example of taking credit for oneself. But she didn't elaborate. These were extremely confidential matters that she had never told Huai. At first, Huai thought that she was trying to keep him in suspense or deliberately mystifying things. Later, after he gradually came into contact with all kinds of inconceivable information shielding and operation cases of the Astronomy Society, he understood that sometimes, even if he knew this information, his name would appear on the silent monument kept by the Continuation Academy. Once he said it out loud, it would be detected by the Doomsday clock of the technical department. And if it was a few decades earlier, the whole process would be recorded by the Book of Destiny connected to the Kingdom of Heaven. It wasn't that he couldn't tell others, just like how the Stoneforge Academy never forbade others from learning alchemy by skipping the step of buying teaching materials. Once it was known, someone would have to pay the price for the illegal circulation of this intellectual. During the period of vigilance, it was not surprising that they were even sentenced to mimetic purge. Therefore, even the dissolute crow had to keep his mouth shut most of the time. He was afraid that if he let the cat out of the bag, his contestant would be directly teleported to the Tower of London by the Bifrost and sentenced to eternal imprisonment. This time, she didn't even come in by herself. She could only help him bring in his sole ability in a roundabout way. As the biggest traitor of the Astronomy Society, Huai felt a lot of pressure. He even considered whether he should force Fu Yi to withdraw from this exploration. But after he said it out loud, Fu Yi naturally objected. For some reason, Huai always felt that her objection seemed to be very reasonable. He couldn't make the final decision. It had been a long time since he was so indecisive, which made Huai a little annoyed. Something's coming. The ground is shaking. Can we eat now? Wait a minute. Just as he was deep in thought, suddenly there was a messy sound around him. He stopped in his tracks, raised his head in astonishment, and looked around, but he didn't see anyone. It was just a barren forest around him. If he was a mountain ghost, he could easily rely on the vitality network here to sense the ghosts hiding in the dark. But now, other than his sense of smell and hearing, it was difficult to distinguish the enemy's location. What's wrong? Fu Yi seemed to have been awakened from a dream. She opened her eyes and carefully glanced at Huai. She didn't seem to have heard anything. But why did she feel a little guilty? Huai looked down at the stoat in the bell and said seriously, "Don't joke around." The stoat was a little nervous subconsciously, and its tail stood up. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't joke around." Huai emphasized again seriously and continued to walk forward. Then, the same sound came from the surroundings. Huai's expression turned serious and he suddenly turned back. He didn't see anything. Only the barren forest, and the strange circles of stripes on the mottled trees. For some reason, those stripes overlapped in one place, resembling strange faces. They didn't look like humans, but more like lizards or snakes. Some kind of combination of cold-blooded animals and trees. Huaishi's heart tightened. Trees can talk? Someone's coming. A face on a tree suddenly shouted. Fu Yi, did you hear that? Huaishi lowered his head and asked. Fu Yi was at a loss, but then another tree screamed, the ground is shaking. An impatient face shouted, Can we eat now? Wait a minute. A voice in the distance replied. Huaishi frowned. Someone's coming. The ground is shaking. Can we eat now? Wait a minute. Those trees seemed to only know how to say these words. The lips on the faces opened and closed, but other than shouting, they didn't do anything. It was as if they only liked to sing and rap. But the more focused Huaishi was, the more he felt dizzy. For some reason, he felt that the markings on the trees were beginning to move. In the end, a wolf-like face appeared on the markings on a withered tree. It shouted in horror, Trees can talk. Huaishi was stunned. On the tree, his beast face became clearer, and he shouted again, Trees can talk. Huaishi felt dizzy, and his face became numb. He felt sleepy, as if his consciousness was divided into two, and a part of it still remained in his body. A part of it had already entered the tree. Trees can talk. The face on the withered tree widened its eyes, and its tone was 80% similar to Huaishi's. Fu Yi, did you hear that? Trees can talk. What the hell? Huaishi's claws suddenly popped out and swung horizontally forward. But the tree was like an illusion. As his sharp claws swept past, it instantly dissipated. After it left, it returned to normal, but the face became more and more similar to Huaishi's. It screamed in horror, What the hell? It was imitating him. No, now Huaishi was already regretting making a sound. The more he spoke, the more this strange, withered tree resembled him. He didn't even need to think to know that if this thing became exactly like him, he wouldn't have a good time. But this appearance inexplicably reminded Huaishi of the ceremony when he advanced to Mountain Ghost in the past. Tree Blood Urn. Wasn't the strange power of the Tree Blood Urn extremely similar to it? It was just that it needed Huaishi's blood, and this ghost that was still alive only needed to hear Huaishi's voice. Huaishi, what's wrong with you? Fu Yi looked blankly at Huaishi, who seemed to have gone crazy and was confused. Fu Yi, did you hear that? Trees can talk. The strange withered tree's screams became more and more shrill, Don't joke around. Just as the striped face stared fixedly at Huaishi, the extreme version of Huaishi's face suddenly seeped with foul-smelling blood. He snarled, imitated his tone, and constantly pulled at his consciousness and soul, until Huaishi grinned hideously at it. You like to imitate people, don't you? Huaishi looked at it indifferently and suddenly shouted, I swear to uphold the principles of the Astronomical Association and guard the peace of the present realm. I will never let down the honor and responsibility brought by this duty. From today onwards I uphold. The smiling face on the withered tree became more and more hideous, and began to repeat what he said. But halfway through, the face suddenly stiffened, as if it was frozen, and the words came to an abrupt end. Puff. A tragic crack appeared on the tree's surface, causing it to let out a hiss. You dare to imitate an oath. Do you want to die? Huaishi sneered and raised his claws. On his sharp claws, the cold light of the axe of wrath shone. The hand of confinement was activated, and it swept horizontally. The dual attack of matter and origin substance instantly exploded, tearing the ghostly face and the entire tree to pieces. Mournful blood spurted out from the broken tree stump. It settled. On the night of the witch, who is in charge of the Astronomical Association, shouting the oath of the Astronomical Association, a rural monster like you probably doesn't know how to die. If it was a normal person shouting, it wouldn't be a big deal, but if something with origin substance dared to shout like that under the rules of the Astronomical Association, the effect was similar to directly surrendering. If it was in the present realm, The HR department of the Central Bureau of Human Resources couldn't help but sneer after receiving the report and send a note to the processing department, sending you a black letter. In less than 3 minutes, there would be a grenade aimed at your head, letting you experience what it meant to be killed by an 8x scope with a headshot. If you can't be a member of the Astronomical Association, then be a ghost of the Astronomical Association. If it weren't for the fact that he was worried that the park would run too far away and be too far away to reach, Sure would have directly shouted a few lines and let it experience the power of the good brothers in the legal department. Once it lost its strange method of dodging attacks, this guy whose mind attacks had been nullified was just a piece of cake. It wouldn't even be enough to drink 2 tails of water. Sure sent them all on their way in no time at all. From beginning to end, Fu Yi blankly watched as Sure turned into a destructive maniac. It wasn't until the end that she realized what was going on and suddenly realized, "Oh, were we attacked?" Sure was speechless. "So you didn't notice anything at all?" Chapter 336. Until now, Sure suddenly realized. It seemed maybe those guys never targeted Fu Yi at all? Since she became translucent, sometimes even Sure would subconsciously ignore her, and the group of dead trees that learned to talk didn't notice Fu Yi's existence at all. Was she invisible? Or Sure curiously looked at her translucent appearance and vaguely seemed to understand something. Could it be that in addition to physical concealment, she could also disappear from the perception of monsters? Especially when she was sleeping, her presence was so faint that it was impossible to notice. Just as he was deep in thought, the tip of his nose suddenly moved, and he suddenly turned around. Someone's coming. The sound of broken branches sounded, and behind the dark trees that were entangled like corpses, there was a faint sound of footsteps. The strong smell of incense spread out, but it couldn't hide the rotten smell under the robe. Carrying a heavy rusty incense burner, the monk in a tattered robe staggered in the dense forest and slowly walked towards them. This was the first time Sure saw a living creature here. But it wasn't a human. It was the same as the corpses he saw on the road. It had a face that was almost like a lizard and a snake. There was no hair on its body, and under the peeled scales there was pus and blood. It was like a deep disease, but the pair of bloodshot eyes were frighteningly bright, and when it stared at Sure, it was full of fanatical desire. Just as Sure tensed up and was about to launch an attack, the figure suddenly knelt down. Without hesitation, it bowed to him. "Holy! Oh, great divine spirit!" It made a hoarse voice like a roar, sharp and ear-piercing. When it crawled on the ground, its body trembled in awe, and its tone was so pious that it was frightening. "Please, show mercy, and save this country, huh?" He froze in place with a confused face. "What are you talking about?" Ding, main quest updated. Fu Yi and the bell jumped for a moment and added a sound for him. About 2 hours later, Sure, who was sitting on the ground, roughly understood what had happened from the prostrating monk. It was not an easy task to find out what little information was really useful among all the obscure religious expressions, praises, and epithet. He still had to try to distinguish between the real and the fake. Sure was mentally exhausted. After listening, he pondered for a moment and asked seriously, "In short, you mean that there are still a few countries in this world, right?" The monk nodded. "The world is facing the end of the world? Many countries have already begun to decline. If we don't do anything about it, we'll end up in the same situation as before. Is that right?" The monk nodded. "Now that you are trapped in the capital, there are only 20 to 30,000 people left in the country. Moreover, all of them are seriously ill and are about to die, right?" The monk sighed in agreement. "So, you pray devoutly, hoping that the legendary representative of God who descends every time the end of the world, the great spirit created by God, will save you?" Sure paused for a moment, raised his finger, and pointed at his ferocious face that did not look like a good thing. "And this great spirit is me?" The monk kowtowed in ecstasy. Huai Shi thought for a moment and looked at him with pity. Then isn't your country very pitiful? To be honest, the country was in such a dilapidated state that they still had to rely on a large husky to save them. It was a bit too tragic. What could Huai Shi do? Huai Shi could give them a quick death, and then burn all the things they left behind. Even if they could not go to heaven, they could at least be relieved. Other than that, Huai Shi did not feel that he looked like a savior. What are you after? He was puzzled. 3 days ago, God has sent down an oracle. Many great spirits have come to the world. The ascetic monk struggled to speak. His Majesty. His Majesty has sent out all the people who can still walk, to all parts of the country to search for the great spirits who have come to the world. The eternal war is about to begin. Only in this way. Holy Great Spirit, only in this way. This tortured country can be saved. The eternal war? Huai Shi was silent for a moment and narrowed his eyes. In other words, you are going to have a war. It is as you said. The monk kowtowed and left spots of blood on the sharp stones to show his piety. Please give us mercy. Please, Great Spirit, destroy the impure so that the righteous can live. What should we do? Huai Shi asked Fu Yi, who was hiding in the bell, through telepathy. I have a feeling that they are just tools. Ah no, tool dogs. Don't worry, he is not lying. Fu Yi seemed to be unexpectedly certain in this regard. They are sincere in looking for you, and they have no intention of harming you. Just now, there was a new authority discussion group in the Internal Communication Forum of the Astronomy Society called The Eternal War, but I don't have the authority to activate it, so I can't open it. Amazing, how can you authority dogs have such a thing? Isn't it strange for someone like you who has nothing? However, there isn't anything of real value on it. Although the atmosphere is very harmonious, everyone is a competitor. That kind of hard work and experience of pioneering will definitely not be posted. Occasionally, there will be some reminders and guidelines to prevent those who are lagging behind from being killed at first sight. Fu Yi flipped through the few posts in the forum, as if she could see the look of those people who were afraid of leaking any key information, and sighed helplessly. They should have reported the really useful things, right? I can also see a lot of tasks posted by outside scholars, most of which are physical exploration and professional experiments to get specific data and parameters. Anyway, I don't understand any of them, and it is not my place to care. After hearing this, Huai Shi looked up to the sky and sighed, feeling more and more helpless. The scholars of the Continuation Academy were all treasures, only the low-level thugs like him were like grass, lacking the motherly love from the higher-ups, and even the configuration was the simplified version, killing but not burying. It is so important to study hard. He sighed from the bottom of his heart. The monk kneeling on the ground looked confused, not knowing what De Ling was talking about. Okay, let's go. Huai Shi spat and dragged the iron stake behind him with his tail again. Lead the way, and we will go to where is your place? The capital. The monk was overjoyed. Yes, the capital. Huai Shi shook his head. I want to see what kind of trouble you can stir up. The ecstatic monk got up from the ground and screamed in surprise, rolling and crawling in front, looking back from time to time to see if Huai Shi was following behind. He was afraid that he would suddenly disappear. Huai Shi followed behind. As the monk shook the incense burner in his hand, a strong smell of copper rose into the air. Under the lingering fragrance, everything in front of him seemed to tremble slightly. In just a few steps, he walked out of the dense forest. His speed was unbelievably fast. With a burning incense burner in hand, the monk led the way in front, reminding Huai Shi not to walk out of the range of the incense. This kind of experience was too strange. Under the envelopment of the fragrance, they clearly didn't take many steps forward, but when they came back to their senses, they felt that they had walked a long way from their original position. With a few steps, he crossed a mountain ridge and a large river. Furthermore, he didn't encounter anything strange after that. It was as smooth and safe as sightseeing. What's that? Huai-Shi asked curiously. Holy oil, the kingdom's final collection, a precious treasure left behind from the previous era, the monk explained in a hoarse voice. As long as we are within the range of the incense, we can temporarily suppress the mutation so that those strange and ominous things won't be able to detect us. Those ominous things you mentioned, are there many of them? Except for the king's city, which still has a little light from the burning of the holy oil, all the other places have been occupied by plague and death. The monk gasped hoarsely, as if he was crying bitterly. But his voice sounded like he was laughing wildly, sending chills down people's spines. Those who do not believe, those who have been abandoned by the gods, have been cursed. Only the beloved believers can live forever, forever. All right, whatever you say. Huai-Shi curled his lips and heard Fu Yi's reminder. Look at the sky. A shadow quickly swept across the ground. It was a huge projection from the sky. As Huai-Shi looked up, he saw a huge bird flying out from behind the broken clouds. It was like a huge bomber passing through the sky. When it flapped its wings, it set off a burst of low thunder. From the sky, it cast an indifferent glance at the wolf beast and the group on the ground. In its claws, it was holding a monk-like person, waving at the group on the ground. Great Spirit! Another Great Spirit! The monk next to Huai-Shi shouted in surprise, almost crying with joy. God, the sixth Great Spirit has also come to our country. God bless the kingdom, God bless the kingdom! God is looking after us, merciful and gracious. Mercy and grace. Huai-Shi rolled his eyes. He almost couldn't stand this guy's fanatical belief. He asked Fu Yi, is that someone from the Astronomical Association? It should be another explorer. I don't see the Astronomical Association's logo. Fu Yi replied, but I'm scanning more and more explorer signals. Everyone seems to be gathering in this area. All right, I smell the scent of PvP. Huai-Shi sighed, but for some reason, he was a little excited. Was it an eternal battle between monsters? People couldn't help but look forward to it. They continued to move forward, passing by barren mountains, plains filled with black tentacles and tumors, lakes and rivers filled with strange eyeballs, forests and grasslands that were as colorful as flesh and blood, as well as ruins, corpses and corpses. There were more and more cracks in the ground, even forming a bottomless valley that extended to the end of Huai-Shi's line of sight, and they walked along the deep valley. Finally, in the aura of death and decay, they finally found a slightly more complete building and road, as well as a glimpse of the towering city walls and countless layers of dense cold buildings. It was like a war fortress built on the mountain. Every corner revealed sharpness and ferocity, without any of the noise and life of an ordinary city. Instead, it exuded a ferocious feeling like a beast. The capital. They finally arrived at the country of fog. Wait a moment, I have a question. Huai-Shi raised his finger and pointed to the mountain in the distance. The one in front is your capital, right? The monk nodded. Then Huai-Shi asked curiously, across the valley below the mountain, which 5 cities belong to? Chapter 337. Under the dim yellow sky with a trace of blood, the earth was full of devastation. Huge cracks that seemed to lead to the abyss crisscrossed the ground. Compared to them, even the huge Huai-Shi was just an insignificant speck of dust. As the cracks and valleys crisscrossed, a huge mountain had been completely divided. It was like a cake that kindergarten children had drunk too much vodka and were dividing. It was simply a mess and did not conform to the common sense of geography at all. On the broken mountain in front of Huai-Shi was the capital city that the lizard monk spoke of. But the problem was, in addition to the heavily guarded capital city, the other mountains were clearly built in a style completely different from their capital city, but at the same time, filled with a gloomy and cold aura. It was as if they were confronting each other. Huai Shi could even see the brown bloodstains on the layers of the walls after the layers of dried blood were splashed on them. From a distance, a rotten smell came from the deep valley. Who knew how many rotting corpses could emit such a strong stench, which made Huai Shi feel more and more uncomfortable. That is also the capital city. The monk's snake eyes showed indescribable hatred. The capital city of the faithless, the nest of the heretics, the gathering place of the devils on the earth. One day, those sinners will be destroyed in the thunder of God's punishment. Your God is quite creative. Huai Shi climbed to a mound and looked up into the distance. He was almost amused. Those few capital cities were completely built on the edge of the crack of the abyss. They relied on the geographical advantage to build fortresses and then faced each other with heavy security. Now it seemed that those cracks were a sign of the division of territory between countries, right? But where did so many little geniuses move the capital city to the border of the country and transform it into military fortresses come from? Even the emperor did not guard the country's gate like this, did he? It was as if he could not wait to go on a personal expedition every morning before he got up to go to the toilet. What was he after? He was simply crazy. It seemed that it had been many years since they were built. Now, one of the 6 cities had completely declined, collapsed, and turned into ruins, while the other 5 cities still maintained their hostility toward each other and were at daggers drawn. Standing dozens of kilometers away, Huai Shi could already smell all kinds of smells from there. The smell of wild beasts. Who knew how many explorers were now in those cities, waiting for the eternal war to begin? How many of them are GM cheats? Huai Shi asked. There are about 5 people who have shown themselves. Fu Yi glanced at the map. 1 on this side, 3 on the left, and 1 on the opposite side. It's good to have authority. Huai Shi took a sip of lemon and glanced at the fanatical monk. Let's go. Lead the way. Didn't you say that the king wants to see me? Please follow me. The monk carried the incense burner of the incense of the mountain. The whole capital was filled with a strange smell. Standing in front of the long and narrow city gate, and looking up at the towering city wall, one would feel an incomprehensible confusion from the almost absurd Gothic style. Why is the great lizard kingdom still alive when it's in such a mess? Under the cold high walls and sharp spires, gloomy and sharp shadows were cast, covering a numb face. Every pair of eyes that could still be opened were covered with blood vessels. When they stared at Huai Shi, they were so fanatical and happy that it made people uncomfortable. When Huai Shi walked into the city, no one was afraid that the evil beasts on the road would devour them. Instead, they could not wait to crawl on the ground and beg for the grace of the Great Spirit. There were coughing sounds, moaning sounds, and screams in the distance. There was also a rancid smell. There were so few pedestrians that it almost became an empty city, but the strange sounds coming from behind the wall were 100 times more than the pedestrians on the street today. It was as if more dying people were unwillingly letting out their own voices. Fear, uneasiness, pain, and despair. Incomprehensible fanaticism. Prayer. Those clear, vague, hoarse, or high-pitched voices gathered in one place, reciting the scriptures given by God in unison in the cold and gloomy sound of the bell. As she walked up the steep steps, Huai Shi felt that the rancid smell was getting thicker and thicker. This feeling was very strange, as if he was walking step by step into the rotting corpse of a giant beast. The smell of decay was everywhere. It's too disgusting. Fu Yi whispered. Is the border and hell like this? Bullshit, there is an amusement park in hell, it's really fun, you know? Everyone who went to the ghost castle and went to the amusement park gave us a thumbs up. Huai Shi felt that at this time, as the prince of the amusement park, he had to stand up for his work unit, but Fu Yi did not believe him at all. He was about to say something when he heard a roar. It was the loud noise of the palace gate opening. The heavy rocks rubbed against each other, and the solemn faces on the countless reliefs seemed to roar and sing a hymn in unison. The incense was so strong that Huai Shi's sense of smell felt uncomfortable as it rushed towards them and drowned them, but Fu Yi said that she did not smell anything, and was not affected at all. She just reminded him that the map showed that there was a huge red reaction in front that the Astronomical Association's system panel could not analyze, and asked him to be careful. As the palace gates opened one by one, Huai Shi went straight in. He did not even see many guards at all, only a few hunched figures covered in armor standing in the corner. The sound of breathing and coughing was so faint. In the next moment, everyone fell to the ground, and Huai Shi would not be surprised. In the end, Huai Shi finally saw His Majesty the King in the former magnificent and solemn hall, but everything was different from what he had imagined. The former magnificence was now dim and decadent, and the solemn and cold atmosphere had become uncomfortable and oppressive. In the horse hymn of the monks, Huai Shi smelled the rancid smell behind the curtain. It was a ruined smell that could not be concealed no matter how solemn the hymns and fragrant the incense. The front of the high throne was covered with gray gauze and silk, and the dust on it made people wonder if the curtains had been washed in the time since the palace was decorated. What was more noteworthy was the hunched and thin figure on the throne, and the faint and hoarse moans that were like whispers. It was as if they were talking, but the voice could not be heard clearly. Only the old priests kneeling under the throne respectfully kowtowed and listened. After a long time, the old chief priest raised his turbid eyes and looked at Huai Shi, who could be called a giant at the bottom of the steps. His Majesty expresses his heartfelt gratitude and appreciation for your arrival, and his admiration for your character of abhorrence of evil and your righteous indignation against the unclean. Huai Shi was stunned. Are you all translators? But don't fool me, the king just coughed a few times and took a few breaths. Why did you translate such a long paragraph? He raised his eyelids in surprise, afraid that the old man would suddenly tell him after a while, "Sorry, I don't understand what the king said, I just translated it blindly." Behind the curtain, the moans on the throne sounded again, and the chief priest grinned and raised his hands with honor. His Majesty is pleased. His Majesty is pleased. At the bottom of the steps, the prostrating priests shouted excitedly. Well, if you want to be happy, you have to make such a big scene. Are you afraid that people don't know you are happy? The eternal war is about to start. The Great Spirit with the will of God, please rest in the temple with the other great spirits for a while. The chief priest continued to translate. It is your destiny to show your skills in the war to defend the right and the will of God. As for everything else, you don't have to worry. We will offer you all the food and water. We only hope that you can recharge your energy and put an end to the eternal war to prove the will of God. After saying that, he paused for a moment, as if he was listening to the moans behind the curtain. Then, he said in a solemn voice, "At that time, the strongest Great Spirit will be on the altar and merge with the honorable holy body of the deities." Following his fanatical shouts, the heavy silk curtain finally opened slowly to the sides under the pull of the servants' long hooks, and Huai Shi finally saw the holy object enshrined with fragrant incense on the towering altar behind the throne. It represented the proof that the gods had once existed. A withered and decayed broken eye. It was only the size of a fist. It was full of cracks, like a broken glass marble. The scarlet color almost overflowed from the scars and turned into a thin line, winding down the altar. That was the source of the huge, unknown red reaction. Just by looking at it, he felt a piercing pain in his eyes. Huai Shi's scales were rubbing against each other in pain. The ancient gaze was squeezing out his consciousness and soul, forcing him to kneel before the noble saintly body. But what he cared about more was the stooped and old king on the throne in front of the altar. Why wasn't he dead yet? No matter who saw the king for the first time, they should have thought so. Decayed to such a state, he should have started to rot, right? But on the shriveled and stooped body, the eye that was covered with haze still stubbornly opened. Even if the eye was dim and without light, it was just like a mummy. However, from the saint body on the altar, a thin and sticky thread of blood slowly swam to his body, sustaining his life with the power of the saint body. His senseless agony seemed to last for eternity. The unsightly distortion had been entangled in every part of the body, but he was still breathing, moaning, and experiencing the pain of survival. The mutated bones pierced out of his skull, decorated with jewel-like mold, forming a deformed crown on his head. Under the old and colorless silk clothes, the heart was still beating stubbornly on the shriveled skeleton-like chest. With the difficult rhythm of the pulse, the blood vessels that grew out of his body sank into the throne behind him, passing through the rocks. They had already spread to the deepest part of the city like the roots of a tree, enveloping the entire cold and gloomy capital. It connected him to the city. The weak breathing was like a spider's silk, pulling the power of thousands of pounds, firmly maintaining the last lifeline of the country. Huaishe finally understood why the city could still survive so many disasters. "I'm counting on you." Great Spirit, on the throne, the dying but not dead king struggled to raise an ugly smile, and finally let out a hoarse voice in the midst of moaning. "Please give this country, the final salvation and relief." Chapter 338. There seemed to be no distinction between night and day in the king's city. It was always like dusk, neither bright nor dark, which made people unhappy. It was neither dry nor brittle. It was just like this world and this country and other countries. Slowly and sticky, they were immersed in death little by little, but there was still a long way to go before the final happy end. It was as if they were lying in the intensive care unit with tubes inserted. Death wasn't torture. It was the endless pain before death. I think it's all very pitiful. In the huge temple that seemed to be specially built for giant beasts, Huaishe heard Fu Yi's sigh. Huaishe glanced back and couldn't help but remind her, "If you can spit out the pine cone in your mouth when you speak, your feelings will be more sincere." "But what does this have to do with me?" Fu Yi tilted her head and calmly asked. "Anyway, I'm not the one who's going to make the puppets. If I'm really hot-blooded, won't you be in front of me?" "Wow, you really don't have any love at all." Fu Yi rolled her eyes. "I've become a stoat. Why would a husky say that I don't have any love?" Hearing her tired voice, Huaishe shook his head. "Are you scared?" Even Huaishe, who was experienced and knowledgeable, was a little scared by the scene, let alone Fu Yi. "If you want to say that I'm scared, it's a little bit, but more than that. I'm probably disgusted." Fu Yi thought for a moment and said seriously, "It's really ugly that you're not willing to just die when you're at death's door." It was hard to say how disgusting it was. Glancing at her expression that not only was she not afraid, but was also full of shame, hurry up and leave the group, Huaishe began to wonder if this woman's nerves were a little too tenacious. "I say, aren't you scared?" "What's there to be scared of?" Fu Yi asked. "I have the GM authority, and a golden fighter bodyguard. What's there to be scared of?" "You don't want me to leave the group again, do you?" "I won't." The translucent stoat shrank back into the bell again, as if it didn't want to listen to the huskies chanting, which made Huaishe feel very helpless. "Forget it. It's up to you whether you want to withdraw or not." Huaishe shook his head and heard a knock on the door of the temple. "Holy Spirit, the medal you requested has been delivered." Huaishe stretched out his hand and pulled the bell to a place where no one could see it. He coughed twice and let the group of lizardmen who served him enter. However, looking at their dying appearance, Huaishe was really afraid that these guys would suddenly die when they pushed the cart in. The two carriages were filled with all kinds of metal products that Huaishe had requested. Now there was more than a small mountain of gold, silver, bronze, and black iron, emitting a sweet and delicious rusty smell and a spicy metallic smell. A good dinner plus rare metal materials. After they left and closed the door, Huaishe casually pulled out half of it to make tonight's supper, and then took out the snake's spine that he had dragged with his tail for tens of thousands of miles. Now, the flat snake's spine had been covered with several layers of Huai Shi's molten iron saliva, and it emitted an indescribable saliva smell that made Fu Yi's nose feel very uncomfortable. "What are you doing?" She poked her head out and asked. "Isn't the PvP starting tomorrow?" Huai Shi pressed his feet on the iron stake and grinned, revealing a row of sharp teeth. "I'm going to prepare a surprise for the other side." Soon, the high-pitched sound of metal rubbing together rang out from the temple. It rumbled throughout the night. At first, Fu Yi was annoyed, but later on, as she listened, she gradually fell asleep to the rhythmic music. When dawn was about to break, she was awakened by the screams coming from the city. She suddenly raised her eyes and looked at Huai Shi in shock. "What's going on?" Huai Shi, who had made a dog power grinding wheel out of nowhere, turned around in shock, his ears twitching in confusion, and said in a loud voice, "What did you say?" All right, after fiddling around for an entire night, he didn't want to make himself deaf before he could even do anything. Fu Yi frowned. "Listen carefully." In the silence, Huai Shi tried hard to listen, and finally heard the gradually fading screams, as if there was no strength left, leaving only weak echoes. The direction seemed to be the palace. For a moment, both of them looked serious. "Do you want to go out and take a look?" Huai Shi held the bell in his mouth and waited, fearing that there would be traitors in the city who would kill the king in the night, and then lead the army to clean up the king's side. Well, clean up this group of monsters that the king had invited. Before the door was pushed open, he heard a low knock on the door. A low voice that he had never heard before sounded. "May I ask if Mei is here?" It was a different voice from the lizardmen in the city. It was polite and came from the outside world, with a rather elegant retroflex sound and an authentic accent. Huai Shi and Fu Yi looked at each other, confused. "Is your mother an acquaintance?" Huai Shi asked in a low voice. "I don't know." Fu Yi shook her head. "I don't remember, never heard of it." Then it seems that Mr. Niffenheim was right. Mei's daughter was involved in an accident. The low voice said, "Hello, Mr. Huai behind the door. I am a member of the internal exploration team of the Witch's Night, named Jonathan. This time, I was ordered to come here to ensure the safety of Miss Fu Yi. If you are worried, you can let Miss Fu Yi confirm my identity through the plugin." A pop-up window suddenly popped up in front of Fu Yi, showing the information of Jonathan Hull. Gravitational Balance Group of the Astronomy Society Continuation Institute, double scholar of geomagnetism and geology, senior alchemist and member of the archaeology team. A level authority. Registration name. I see. After Fu Yi nodded, Huai Shi opened the door and saw the black snake coiled up on the stone steps in front of the door. It was like a statue, its whole body shining with the luster of crystals. Its eyes were like amber. Huai Shi's eyes narrowed slightly. According to their speculation, generally, the type of animal one turned into should be determined by personality and usual habits at the beginning. And things like snakes did not look like good people. Don't get me wrong, although I look like a long strip, in fact. I am the lizard type. Jonathan seemed to have guessed what he was thinking, and awkwardly raised the two rather small and delicate legs under his body. I chose the crystal lizard in hell when I transformed. Strictly speaking, I am still Mei's fellow disciple. No matter what, I will not harm people in front of a military officer with an internal rating of S level. Huai Shi had heard of the crystal lizard before, and he had also seen it in the illustrated handbook. It was a variant of the petrifying lizard, a gem-type mutant. After ignoring the overly large body, it was not far from what he was referring to. But an internal rating of S level? Huai Shi himself was shocked. Why was the rating so high? If it's possible, can you let me in first? Jonathan poked his head out and looked at the stoat hiding behind the metal pile inside. He tried to squeeze out a kind smile, but the result was that he looked exceptionally ferocious. Fu Yi quickly shrank her head and did not come out. Please come in. Huai Shi made way for the unknown, and after he went in, he closed the door. The screams outside should be from a few explorers who overestimated themselves and wanted to take advantage of the kingdom's decline to seize the sacred remains. Now they have reaped what they have sown. Jonathan seemed to know what they were most concerned about and took the lead to say, "These 2 days, I have mainly been studying that thing. It is not something we can come into contact with at the moment. Without more than 6 transformations, let alone devouring it, we will be swallowed by the remnant will of that thing. Unfortunately, I have tried to persuade them, but no one listened." With his words, the screams finally faded away. What replaced them was a dead silence. Silence once again enveloped the entire king's city. Hearing this, Huaishur could not help but gasp. As expected of the Astronomical Association, why were there so many stubborn people? Huaishur had goosebumps when he saw the broken thing on the altar. There were actually people who dared to have designs on that thing. He and Fu Yi had already speculated, and combined with what they had seen in the murals in the cave, the god that these lizardmen worshipped was probably a terrifying giant beast that was comparable to the mountains in the past. The remains left behind by the giant beast, even if it was an upgrade tool, was not something that a group of newbies like them who had just arrived in Stormwind City could touch. "I came this time mainly because I was entrusted by the 2 creators, Mr. Niflheim and Mr. Shack, to find Miss Fu Yi and apologize for our mistakes, as well as provide help and compensation," Jonathan said slowly. "If Miss Fu Yi is willing to leave, you just have to wait for a while, and a special passage will be prepared outside. With my help, there won't be any problems." Fu Yi did not speak, as if she did not understand. She rolled her eyes and focused on the dust on the roof. Jonathan seemed to be about to say something, but his mouth suddenly paused, and there was a crackling sound in the air. Fu Yi's hair trembled, and he was stunned for a long time. Soon, he seemed to understand something, and looked at Fu Yi with a faint smile. "It seems that Miss Fu's progress is much faster than I thought. Well, with Mr. Huaishur's assistance, there won't be any danger." Huaishur was stunned. "What happened? Also, brother, isn't your trust in me a little too much? What the hell is that S-level evaluation?" He coughed dryly and asked. That's the evaluation of the potential of the internal members." Jonathan turned around and explained, "In the document that Mr. Niflheim sent me, Mr. Huaishur was classified as a trusted file that can be used to seek help and entrust when necessary. His ranking is quite high. To be honest, to have such a terrifying record at the age of 17 is really scary, especially with his upright character and admirable style. It's too rare. Although there are some flaws in his relationship, they can't be hidden." "Wait!" Huaishur's eyes widened, and he tried to suppress his anger as he explained, "Don't talk nonsense. I don't have any flaws in my relationship. How dare you defame me in front of my good brother? Prince can tolerate it, but not paradise. Do you know the punishment for image damage?" Sorry, after all, it's personal privacy." Jonathan seemed embarrassed. Black Snake smiled at Huaishur. "Please don't mind it. Beep. Favorability -100. Huaishur dubbed it in his mind, and the words were marked in blood red. He walked to the door in a bad mood. "Okay, since Fu Yi doesn't want to leave, I'll take care of her. There's no tea here, Mr. Jonathan, you can leave." Wait a minute. Jonathan was a little panicked and quickly said, "In fact, I came here this time not only to kick Miss Fu Yi out, but also to form an alliance." Chapter 339. Thanks to the leader of Shaoshan. Alliance? Huaishur pretended to be puzzled and tilted its head. Aren't we allies?" Jonathan snorted. "Then you can only be called passers-by on the same side, right? When others are in trouble, will you really help them?" "Of course." Huaishur blinked her big, innocent eyes at him, as if she was talking about something that was perfectly justified. Bragging was free anyway, so he could brag for now. It was a seller's market now. After learning from Crow for so long, he didn't have any attainments in being black-hearted, but when it came to being thick-skinned, he really didn't think much of others. He wasn't in a hurry. Anyway, Jonathan was the one who was in a hurry. He actually didn't mind teaming up with others. After all, Jonathan's background was guaranteed. But if he didn't accept anything, then wouldn't Jonathan have come for nothing? In short, if he didn't get something solid out of him today, why sure wouldn't agree. Jonathan didn't say anything, and his face was full of astonishment. It was unknown if he was shocked by Huaishi's shamelessness or if he sincerely admired such noble morals. After a long time, he sighed. Teacher Shay was right when he said that you don't wake up early if there are no benefits. Oh, we're all members of the astronomy club. There's no such thing as money or benefit. We rely on our parents at home and rely on our brothers when we go out. How can I not be willing when you come to me for help? After making a mental note of a certain grandson named Shay in his heart, Huaishi squeezed out an awkward smile and threw out another question. But there should be a lot of explorers from the astronomy club in the city, right? He asked. Why are you looking for us? Jonathan's expression suddenly became conflicted. Ahem, that's a bit of a long story. Huaishi nodded her head. Then why don't we stop here for today? As for the rest, we can talk tomorrow? Jonathan's expression became more and more bitter. Little brother, why aren't you following the routine? Huaishi blinked his big watery eyes as if he didn't know anything. Only his tail was wagging proudly, waiting for him to answer. He didn't want anything. He just wanted to be mischievous. For the past 2 days, his good brother had been by his side, so he couldn't say anything flirtatious. It was quite uncomfortable to hold it in. Jonathan sighed and explained the reason in detail. In fact, everyone had their own social circle. Even if it was a peaceful two-dimensional world, they would still fight over a single character, let alone the academic world. As a double scholar of geology and geomagnetism, Jonathan's ability was not low. Although the power of a scholar was useless here, his combat power after the transformation was still quite impressive. It could be said that she was a rare talent. But the problem was, there would always be some people who would latch onto the tale of positivism and go around shouting that geology wasn't science. When encountering such an idiot, Jonathan would usually beat the dog's brains out. After 2 or 3 times, he was satisfied, but it caused his reputation to be tarnished. Well, if this was a public institution, he would definitely be the one with the worst relationships in the department. Every winter, his share would definitely be the narrowest. Moreover, most of the people who came in this time were scholars of biology and meteorology. There were not many geologists, so he couldn't even hug them. On the other hand, it was because the experimental project he spent a lot of effort on in the underground world had failed. Sometimes academia was so cruel. A law often required decades to be deduced, analyzed, and established before it could be applied and practiced. But to deny it, it only took a moment. An unexpected small bug completely destroyed his geological model, making all his previous efforts go down the drain. He didn't want to join other people's research teams and had no time to find another research direction. There was no way out. Just when he was feeling terrible, he was recommended by his former teacher, Shak, to accept the mission of another creator, Niflheim, to go to the country of fog to find Fu-Yi. When he was studying in America, he even had to attend the parent-teacher conference for his boss. Moreover, his sister-in-law was so beautiful, so he wouldn't lose out. He might as well use his remaining energy. However, Huaishi's appearance rekindled a glimmer of hope in him. He decided to lie low for a while and change his research direction. You want to study the remains of God? Huaishi widened his eyes in disbelief. So many people just died. Why are you still thinking about Hell's Gate? Ahem, I don't want to steal it. In fact, I just want to get more research data. Speaking of which, before I specialized in geology because of my hobby, Madame May and I were both teacher shack students. I more or less remember the laws of the origin of life and historical evolution. Jonathan rubbed his hands awkwardly. That's why I'm planning to see if I can get more data and laws from such a good topic, write a paper, and get my certificate in paleontology later. If he could succeed, he would be a scholar in 3 fields. If he mastered the 3 major subjects of geomagnetism, geology, and paleontology, wouldn't it be easier to make progress in the future? However, after he said his plan, what greeted him was not the admiration and astonishment he had expected. Instead, he was met with 2 cold gazes. Huaishur and Fu Yi exchanged a look. "I think it's better to forget about it," Fu Yi said. "I think so too." Huaishur nodded. "None of the top students are innocent." Sensing the malice of the self-study scum, Jonathan suddenly panicked. "Wait, I'm also very useful. Hey, I'm actually very strong." As Jonathan spoke, he waved his claws. The iron materials that Huaishur had piled up in the corner were suddenly shrouded by an invisible magnetic force. They abruptly shrank into a ball and suspended in the air. "Look, I definitely won't hold you back. If I use my full strength, I can control the geomagnetic repulsion to reach 1,000 tons. Wow, all things heavenly attraction." Huaishur, who was eating melon seeds, applauded. "Awesome, awesome, awesome." For a moment, Huaishur could not stop praising him. It seemed that there was no end to the compliments, but he had no intention of nodding or relenting at all. He just looked at Jonathan with his big eyes, waiting for him to finish. "Well, there is indeed a little flaw." Jonathan sighed helplessly. "When I control the magnetic force, there is not much resistance at all. Moreover, if the overclocking time is too long, it will cause shock due to insufficient blood supply." When he said this, Huaishur finally understood. "Well, you're looking for a tank. I don't care about the spoils of war and the exploration of the Witch's Night. If there's anything, it can all be yours. I just want to find a bodyguard to stay for a while and collect more data that will be used in the thesis. If it doesn't involve life-threatening situations, I will unconditionally assist you. You just need to leave one alive to give me the finishing blow every now and then and accumulate the power of evolution." Jonathan sighed. In the end, he didn't want to waste time on a negotiation that was meaningless to him. "This is my final offer, Mr. Hui. If you agree, I have additional information here for you. If you don't agree, please tell me as soon as possible. I can also talk to someone else." "I agree. Why don't you agree?" Seeing that he was about to get all the benefits, Huaishur immediately clapped his paws and said enthusiastically, "Look at me, isn't my reaction slow? Brother Qiao, don't worry." "It's Jonathan," the rock lizard corrected him helplessly. "It's all the same, it's all the same." Huaishur enthusiastically reached out his paw and shook its paw. Regarding the conditions proposed by the scholar, he helplessly expressed that they were all family. Why did they have to be so distant? Since it was no different from bringing 1 or 2, he might as well bring them all together. "So, the information you mentioned," Huaishur licked his nose. "Is it powerful?" "I don't know if it's powerful or not, but it can be considered special for the time being." Jonathan let out a long breath. It was obvious that a huge stone had been lifted from his heart. It was not easy to find a bodyguard these days. Those who could fight were unreliable and easy to backstab, and those who were honest and sincere often could not guard against open knives and hidden arrows. A bodyguard like Huaishur who could fight exceptionally well and whose integrity was guaranteed, but who was just listless and bad, was really hard to find. He was also afraid that Huaishur would not agree. As for the information, he was confident that it was exclusive to him. "This country is maintained by the blood of the giant beast," he said. "To be exact, all the remaining countries are like this." "What?" Huaishur was stunned. "This is the true face of the eternal war," Jonathan said. A war to screen the gods and survivors before the arrival of the end of the world. As a mutated branch of the petrifying lizards, crystal lizards often had different special organs and abilities according to their own crystals. It was the direction that Jonathan chose when he transformed into a magnetic crystal lizard, which was the closest to his specialty. But it seemed that there was a little problem in the transformation process, which caused his 4 legs to become ornaments and his mobility to be greatly reduced. At the cost of this, his own talent was greatly enhanced. Now, not only could he smell the faint changes in geomagnetism, but he could even read the broken records from the chaotic magnetic fields in places with many magnetic mines. Among them were the experiment records preserved from the last era, Jonathan said solemnly. Before the Night of the Witch, this experiment had been carried out many times in the abyss, and the relevant laws and theorems had been developed quite thoroughly. However, the earliest explorers were not us, but the various abyssals who did not enter. Now, many genes and bloodlines have been passed down here, which is why we can see so many types of creatures here. But there is no doubt that the end of the world has come many times. That is to say, the eras are divided by the end of the world? Huaishur asked. Jonathan nodded. And there has been a quite mature way to deal with the end of the world, which is the so-called eternal war. The gods they worship were once the best among the giant beasts. You should know this by looking at the sacred remains on the altar, right? Jonathan's lizard face showed a sneer. Do you know where the sacred oil that the monks burned came from? It is the blood of the giant beasts that have transformed more than 7 times. This country survived until now by burning the blood of the giant beasts that were once buried underground, just like all the other countries. Not only this continental area, but other continental areas and even the ocean are probably the same. Similar eternal war, I am afraid that it has been carried out all over the territory. What the hell? Huaishur, who thought that this place was already the whole map, was stunned. Are we still leveling up by changing one map after another? Chapter 340. According to the Astronomical Society's method of measurement, the scholars had figured out the size of the witch's dream. It had to be said that among the many creators, this unknown creator who had passed away was also at the forefront. He was able to create such a huge, illusory world just by relying on the laws and knowledge he had mastered. Purely in terms of spatial scale, it was almost not inferior to any continent. And the area where the 6 countries were located was just a corner of it. Other than that, there was an even bigger world. Come on, it's convenient to fight Frisia after Piccolo. Huaishur raised his claw to signal him to stop talking, and went straight to the point. What you mean just now is that the blood of the behemoth can prevent the depth from deepening. I'm afraid it's a rule that only belongs here, a rule that was set up to force the explorers to evolve faster, Jonathan explained. Jonathan explained, including the Battle of Eternity, it is also a ritual born to speed up the evolution process. Isn't this like raising poisonous insects? Huaishur pinched his chin. I feel like I've seen this style somewhere before. You're not hiding anything from me, are you? No. Jonathan shook his lizard head like a rattledrum. We're all allies. How can I lie to you? It was not easy to find an ally. What if he was scared away? Not to mention the abyssal food chain, even the words rancher and destructive factor would not come out of his mouth. When scholars were bad, they were really bad. For the sake of research, they would even give up their lives, so why would they want anything else? There was an old joke in the Astronomical Society. It was said that 3 old scholars were walking in hell when they were suddenly caught by a destructive factor that they had never seen before. The first reaction of the 3 was not to run away, but to start racking their brains to think of how to stop the other 2 from snatching the thesis topic from them. At the same time, they were also on guard against the other 2 from killing them for the thesis. Seeing that Huaishur had sensed something was wrong, he quickly changed the topic. I've been around the capital for the past 2 days. I've even taken the risk to go to other countries and checked almost all the mineral veins that I could come into contact with. This is what I inferred based on the fragmentary records stored in the magnetic field. It may not be correct, but it's definitely not far from the truth. Jonathan coughed a few times solemnly and threw out the most important information. The so-called eternal war is to let the giant beasts kill each other. Through killing, they will evolve continuously and compete for the strongest. Then, they will merge with the divine remains and transform into new gods. They will protect their race so that they can survive the destruction brought by the apocalypse and usher in a new era. What if all the giant beasts in your house are slaughtered? Then it's over. Jonathan pointed at the ruins on the other lonely mountain expressionlessly. That was the result of failure in the battle of eternity. In order to survive the apocalypse, every country will do whatever it takes to kill the great spirits of other countries. Starting from noon today, the Rift Valley will become the bloodiest battlefield. When that time comes, not only the great beasts, but the other countries will also spare no effort to support their great spirits. However, I feel that the lizard men won't be able to do anything other than provide us with food and water. After all, the country of fog is the weakest among all the countries. In the silence, Huaishur looked at him and suddenly asked, "Before the battle of eternity begins, is it too late for us to be a traitor?" "Don't worry, listen to me." Jonathan was used to keeping people in suspense, but he did not expect Huaishur to be so adept at being a traitor. She did not have any integrity at all. He was a little anxious. Although the country of fog is the weakest, it has the most resources. After all, among all the existing countries, they are the only country that can survive from 3 eras to the present. They have experienced at least 3 eternal wars. The divine remains that have experienced 3 generations of inheritance are definitely the best among all the countries. Don't you want to fight? Not at all. I have already said that the great lizard country will be done for. Fui, pack up, let's go. Just when Huaishur was about to pack up and take Monkey King back to Gao Lao village, he suddenly felt a mighty bell ring in the deepest part of King City. In the roar that was like the roar of a giant beast, in an instant, a layer of vague and ferocious aura descended from the sky and entered the temples all over the city. In an instant, it persisted on Huaishur and the others. It was as if the gods above the sky cast an indifferent glance down and gave a meager gift. In an instant, the progress of Huaishur's bone's metallization actually jumped a lot. After the bone marrow experienced a burst of stinging pain, it actually glowed with a faint golden light, making the blood in the body become like viscous iron slurry, flowing with a cold silver light. Feeling the numbness and itchiness in his body and the increase of more than 20% of his muscle strength, Huaishur couldn't help but click his tongue. Well, the money is given out pretty quickly. Jonathan, who looked more and more gray, comforted him. If you think so, you are already here. Moreover, your camp has been bound the moment you entered the city. Otherwise, why would I be chased away like a grandson when I went to other countries for a stroll these 2 days? Huaishur thought for a moment and asked seriously, "Because I am weak?" They had already died dozens of times today. Jonathan rolled his eyes and didn't want to talk to him anymore. The prelude to the eternal war was finally pulled apart amidst the continuous roars and roars of the giant beasts. When the mighty bell ring dissipated, the whole silent king city seemed to be boiling suddenly. Countless hoarse and fanatical voices shouted and devoutly chanted sacred hymns. In the shroud of the song, the whole city seemed to have returned to the holiness of the past. The old and decaying spots and ulcers on the faces faded away. The final radiance of the setting sun. Countless aberrated lizard men in iron armor bathed in the holy water sprinkled by the priests and monks. They greedily sniffed the rich incense, causing their bodies to swell more and more. Their eyes were blood-red, and the desire to kill and eat began to expand wildly. They chanted the hymns hoarsely and couldn't wait any longer. Just in the middle of the formation, the priests on horseback held up banners and bone prayer beads, and loudly preached to the soldiers who were on the verge of losing control. Let us enter a sacred war, a great war to regain the glory of the kingdom and the gods. Let all the pain and torture stop, and embark on the journey to the eternal war. Win back the glory from the hands of those evil unclean people and demon beasts. Let the subjects of the aberration prove their faith in the truth. Let those ignorant people who have lived mediocre lives for money discover true justice and truth. Let everything in this world be bathed in the divine gift. The old priest shouted with all his might, "For the great gods!" So, the sharp voice of the mountain rushed into the sky like a tsunami, tearing the turbid clouds and shaking the cold sky. It seems very powerful. Huai Shi, who existed as a mascot on the huge city wall, looked down at the fanatical and restless army below and couldn't help but sigh. At least the voice is loud. It seems that the food treatment is pretty good. Hey buddy, do you have steamed buns here? I didn't eat enough this morning. The monk waiting in front of him had a bitter look on his face and didn't know how to answer. Beside him, Jonathan had begun to get used to his unconventional style. He rolled his eyes and didn't speak. The other dozen or so great spirits who had been recruited glanced over when they heard the words. Those giant beasts, big and small, felt the ferocious aura on Huai Shi and the strange iron pillar wrapped around his tail behind him. Their eyes became slightly fearful. No one spoke. Amidst the silence, only a giant bear covered in flames arrived late. It lazily greeted its companions, and when it saw the giant bell hanging in front of Huai Shi's chest, it couldn't help but have a mocking look on its face. "Oh my friend, the dog bell is not bad." The giant bear giggled. "It's quite cute, ha 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 ha." Huai Shi smiled carelessly and glanced back at him. "Then I'll give you one later." Behind him, the tail wrapped around the iron pillar slowly shrank, creating a series of dazzling sparks in the harsh sound of friction and the sound of steel wailing. The giant bear's smile stiffened for a moment, then it immediately shrank back and didn't speak. Only Huai Shi still looked like a dog with a faint smile. He stood at the forefront and looked at the city in the distance. In the middle of these messy mountains divided by the Rift Valley, there was a high platform riddled with holes. It was the size of 2 or 3 cities, but now it was full of cracks. More than half of it had been uprooted. After the chaos of war, it was probably left for the giant beasts to fight. Even a place was prepared for you, afraid that you wouldn't have a good fight. This was really too King considerate. Just as Huai Shi was looking at the giant beasts in the surrounding cities, the other giant beasts in the high places were also looking at him. When they saw the body size that could be considered huge among all the giant beasts, all the explorers couldn't help but gasp. This kid was so terrifying that he couldn't be left alive. But just as everyone was hesitating whether or not to focus fire on him in the first wave of attacks, they saw a pair of signature ice blue eyes, a classic black and white color scheme, and a tongue that stuck out from the corner of his mouth. He noticed that something was wrong from the line of saliva hanging in front of his chest. Wait a minute, where the hell did this giant armored husky come from? Many giant beasts breathed a sigh of relief. It was a false alarm. With such a husky in the opposite camp, well, for some reason, everyone felt particularly safe. They were afraid that before the fight started, the other side would tear down their home by themselves, right? However, there were still a few more cautious giant beasts who were not at ease. They looked at the gray penguin hidden in the fog in the team. "Twin Moon, can you see anything?" The giant penguin known as Twin Moon had bright eyes and slender eyebrows, looking particularly domineering. After hearing the words, he fixed his eyes on Huai Shi in the distance and couldn't help but sneer. His mind is simply unguarded. Let me see, he's thinking now. Twin Moon narrowed his eyes and read word by word. Who am I? Huh? He was stunned for a moment. When he narrowed his eyes and looked carefully again, he saw a few big words hovering in Huai Shi's mind. Where am I? What *king am I going to do? Okay, in the awkward silence, the giant beasts retracted their gazes, feeling that there was something wrong with their brains for them to be wary of a purebred husky. Only Huaishur looked around at the other giant beasts with a blank face. He noticed that the premonition of death suddenly came and disappeared. He didn't know what happened at all. I feel like someone is going to harm me. He secretly asked Fu Yi, do you have any clues? How would I know? The stoat, who was tired of brainwashing, rolled her eyes. Maybe it's because you're born beautiful? Makes sense. Huaishur nodded in agreement. Chapter 341. Not to mention Huaishur, who was smugly swinging his tongue in the wind, thinking that he was a natural beauty. In the solemn atmosphere, accompanied by the sharp sound of countless gears turning, the gates leading to the great rift valley opened layer by layer. Like a torrent, the aberrated lizards gathered into a formation and marched toward the deep valley battlefield that had already been dyed red with blood. In the other fortresses that were waiting for battle, a gate also opened with a loud bang. Victory! 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 A roaring voice came from inside. For the Supreme Emperor! Then, iron boots trampled on the ground, and the neat steel formation was accompanied by low footsteps as it slowly advanced forward. Huaishur's eyes widened. Damn, a Roman phalanx? And it was a group of kobolds. That's right, it was a group of kobolds wearing iron armor, holding spears and large shields, and carrying short swords at their waists. Looking at the color of their fur, it was a group of border shepherds. Amazing! At this moment, they came closer and saw Huaishur on the wall, and they couldn't help but look at each other. It was as if they had seen their own family. It was especially like a ritual of a fellow townsman meeting a fellow townsman and shooting a spear in the back. There was no time for each other to be emotional and sad. As the old priest on the city wall raised the banner high, a shrill scream rang out. The aberrated lizards below the city wall burned with red eyes in the fragrant incense. They fanatically chanted hymns and charged toward the border shepherd's phalanx. When these aberrated lizards ran, their bloated and deformed feet trampled on the ground, not afraid of the mud and harsh terrain. It was as if they were riding some kind of mount. They were very fast, and in an instant, they had already rushed into the kobolds' phalanx in a mess with their weapons raised high. Like an ugly tide crashing on a crazy reef, gray, black, white, and red burst out in an instant. The corner of Huaishur's eyes twitched. What happened? Fu Yi shrank in the bell and couldn't see what happened below. She was a little anxious. Everyone is having a get-together. The situation is very happy. So much so that some things that kittens shouldn't see happened. Huaishur raised his paw and simply blocked the hole in the bell. It blocked out the nauseating stench of blood. If one looked at it from afar, the tragic scene looked more like colors dancing in dirty water. However, when paired with the screams, roars, and hymns, it was exceptionally ferocious and frenzied. The ugliest scenes in the world were unfolding before the eyes of the explorers in the most blatant way. Even though both sides were lizardmen and kobolds, which made it difficult for others to empathize with them, Huaishur still felt extremely uncomfortable. At the same time, he also experienced that familiar hunger. That was the instinctive call of his body. Just like Van Helsing, he was desperate for blood. Huaishur easily suppressed this impulse that did not belong to him. He allowed his eyes to burn red and remained motionless. However, the other giant beasts could no longer bear it. Their sharp claws scratched the bricks on the city wall, and sparks burst out in ear-piercing sounds. In the smell of fresh blood, they gradually became thirsty. The other cities were still holding back their troops, coldly watching the two armies offer the first bloody sacrifice for the eternal war in the most tragic way. The first to be unable to hold back was actually the explorers on the other side. As the city gate opened with a bang, the kobold phalanx that was about to collapse seemed to have received an order from the sharp horn sound. They cleanly split into two, opening up a straight path. He let the oppressive hurricane ring out in the midst of his earth-shaking run. The earth trembled, under the charge of the iron-gray giant rhinoceros. It was as if an overly exaggerated armored truck had suddenly barged into a paddy field. Amidst the high-pitched roar of the engine, the straw was easily destroyed, pierced, and torn into pieces. Bathed in the debris and blood of the corpses, the bloodthirsty giant rhinoceros roared excitedly. It suddenly slammed into the gate of the Lizard King city, leaving a deep dent. It seemed to understand that it would be difficult to break through this pure steel gate in a short time, so it simply turned around and crushed the lizard fanatics behind it. The whales played the climax of the tyrannical war. The blood-soaked giant rhinoceros laughed maniacally as it trampled, easily crushing insignificant blisters as it galloped in the pitch-black and crimson mud. On the city wall, the old shaman's face had turned from pale to blood-red. It was simply a miracle. The lizard men seemed to be cold-blooded animals. Suddenly, it raised the banner in its hand and looked back at the great spirits on its side on the city wall with a serious and expectant expression. It was as if an old general on the stage was devising a strategy before the battle. It was only short of asking, "Who can take this bastard's head for me? Leave the first battle to me." In the row at the very front, a huge white deer stepped on clouds and mist slowly rose a little. It stepped forward and floated toward the battlefield with a mysterious and unfathomable calm smile. It was as if the heavens had sent a child to subdue the evil creature below. There was no smoke or fire as it rose and fell. Huaishur could not help but want to praise its excellent qigong. Then it came back again. Except for its head, the rest of its body was forever left on the battlefield. When they were torturing the weak in the beginning, no one felt that the iron-gray rhinoceros was very strong. But now that the white deer went down and was about to show off its martial arts skills, they did not expect that the rhinoceros would suddenly appear in front of them. In an instant it sprinted and then sprinted again. The second sprint, the body that was like a truck broke through the speed of sound and set off a thunderous roar. It did not need any other weapons. Its terrifying mass and hard shell were already the best weapons. Suddenly, the white deer that seemed to have a mysterious trump card was blasted into a pile of mush from the middle as if it was hit by the Dora cannon of Rome. Its forelegs were flung in all directions. Half of its neck and head flew into the sky like a hammer. Blood splattered everywhere as it returned to the city wall. It smashed into the rock next to the old shaman. A pile of mush was almost embedded in the rock. He was definitely deader than dead. In an instant, other than the laughter of the giant rhinoceros below the city wall, there was a dead silence on the city wall. The old shaman's face turned red and white, white and green, green and purple. It spun around like a color palette on a Photoshop. Trembling, he turned back and looked at the other big spirit. His mouth was trembling with anger. He could not speak, but the meaning was clearly expressed. Who was next? All the giant beasts could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Oh my, everyone thought that the ones who went up at the beginning were all Wang Lingguan and the like to make up the numbers. In the end, the other side threw a trump card and invited the master of the Erlang Temple. It was a good start. Red was red. But here it was a white matter. And the most important question was, who was next? For a moment, due to all kinds of concerns, the giant beasts on the city wall did not come out to deal with it. Instead, they all shrank back a little. Everyone looked left and right, wanting to shift the blame. But for some reason, in the end, their gazes gradually turned to Huaishur, who was the biggest and fiercest. "Big brother, it seems that you are the strongest," a green jackal-like creature suggested. "Why don't you go first? That's a bit too much for you." Huaishur looked serious for a long time and pointed to the Roman square below. "Everyone is a dog. It's not easy for me to do it. Now you remember that you are from the same family." Even though many people had prepared a lot of lines, Huaishur was so blatantly shameless that they didn't know how to respond to her. Then, behind the group of beasts, there was a disdainful and fearless voice. "Tsk, all a bunch of cowards. Get out of the way and let me do it." In an instant, the beasts turned around in shock and saw the flaming giant bear who had shrunk to the back. There was no doubt that it should be him, whether it was the direction or the voice. For a moment, they all looked at the giant bear with admiration. "You are so brave." "What?" The flaming giant bear looked blank, as if it did not know what had happened. Seeing that everyone was looking at it, it suddenly panicked and quickly waved its bare paw. I didn't say that. Don't be humble, go." "That's right. I heard it clearly. When it comes to fighting, the bears of our Daluo country are not afraid of anyone." Huaisher shouted and clapped his paw. "It's you." I. The giant bear's face turned purple, and it could not speak clearly. "I didn't say that I would go." In the group of beasts, Huaisher said, "So what you said just now was just to tease everyone?" For a moment, the eyes of all the giant beasts became dangerous. Jonathan did not mind the drama and added, "Why don't we give him a hand?" Then, the eyes of the giant beasts became more dangerous. The flaming bear could no longer recommend. Its originally sad and indignant expression twitched, as if it had accepted the reality and found that it was not bad at all. 30 years to the east, 30 years to the west. Don't look down on a poor young man. When it killed the good-for-nothing below, who would dare to look down on it like this? It gritted its teeth and stomped its feet. Ambition rose in its heart, and it roared. In an instant, the flames on its body rose more than 10 meters high. It rushed forward 2 steps and directly jumped onto the battlefield. In midair, there was a long roar. "Such trash, I want to fight 10 more." Such a domineering declaration not only stunned Huaisher and the others, but also the giant beasts on the city wall who were watching the battle. For a moment, the explorers who were suspicious of it could not help but be impressed by its majestic spirit. They all exclaimed, "Amazing! He just said that he was modest, I can see that." Yes. I knew he was super brave. Only Jonathan saw it clearly. He glanced at the bell on Huaisher's neck intentionally or unintentionally, and there was a trace of fear in his heart. The new generation excels the old. Young girls nowadays, when they learn bad things, even the uncles are afraid of them. Thinking of this, he wanted to say something but stopped. He did not know if he should tell Huaisher about his discovery. Huaisher's intuition was sharp, and he quickly looked over in confusion. "What's wrong?" Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but suddenly there was a vibration in front of his eyes. The chat box in the plug-in popped up. It was Fui. For some reason, when he saw this understated emoji, Jonathan stiffened. Immediately, he awkwardly squeezed out a smile at Huaisher. "No, nothing." Thus, the chat box coldly closed. It was not until a long time after Huaisher withdrew his gaze that Jonathan let out a long breath. Under his scales, he was covered in cold sweat. He suddenly remembered the look in Fuyi's eyes when she last appeared. That kind of calm expression that seemed to understand what he was hiding but did not seem to care. It was like saying, "Do whatever you want as long as you don't disturb her playing the game." Thinking of this, the tip of the rock lizard's tail twitched slightly. That is, if the most dangerous creature here wasn't the evolved version of the forgetful husky. He suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. How many people here had been implanted by her? He finally noticed the pair of indifferent eyes that had been spying on him in the dark all the time. He sucked in a breath of cold air. One of the implied instructions: you cannot betray Fu-Yi. Chapter 342. First, there was a boom, then a duong, and finally a slap. It was over. The giant beasts on the city wall couldn't help but shrink their necks. Squeak. It was too cruel. It was teaching children bad things. The process was very simple. Brother Fire Bear fell from the sky and landed on the ground. Brother Fire Bear spat out flames and was hit by the giant rhinoceros. Brother Fire Bear died. It died so miserably. It was smashed into a pile of mush. Given that he was a decent bear before his death, after the giant rhinoceros killed him, it carefully stepped on him into meat paste and spat on the bear's skin with a look of disdain. You want to fight 10 of us? That was the consequence of being stubborn. The giant rock rhinoceros, which had transformed for the second time, laughed and began to gallop toward the remaining lizard fanatic. On the city wall, the high priest looked defeated and fell to the ground. He couldn't even hold the flag that represented his power. He had no choice. He didn't have anyone who could fight. Life was too difficult. The great lizard kingdom was about to be finished. It didn't matter if he died, but how could he face the previous emperors and popes after he died? On the city wall, all the giant beasts felt ashamed. Jonathan sighed. His body floated up slightly as he prepared to descend into a mess. At most, he could crush that guy in the air and quickly float back. But as soon as he floated up, he was pressed to the ground by Huaishur. Let me do it. The dog-like giant husky flicked its tongue to get rid of the saliva. It then stretched its neck and waist as a warm-up. Fu Yi just said that he could go up. He also felt that it was time to show off. Brother, can you do it? At the front, the coral eagle with the giant tree and strange flower on its back looked at him with worry. If you can't do it, I'll do it. Don't send yourself to death. I'll do it. Don't worry. Huaishur swayed his tail and left the iron pillar on the city wall. He ran to the edge of the city wall, grabbed the edge, and jumped. But he didn't jump into the air as expected. His feet slipped. The rock that he was using as a stepping stone had already loosened. It was sent flying when he stepped on it. It was not able to support him at all. Thus, everyone saw the giant husky waving its limbs in a sorry state as it plummeted straight down. With a thud, his head hit the ground and fell into the mud in the valley. F***ck. When Huaishur finally pulled his head out of the mud, he shook his head violently to get rid of the mud. He turned around angrily and shouted at the high priest on the city wall, "The public facilities should be repaired. If not, people might die." The high priest's face was full of panic. He waved his hand and shouted something at Huaishur, but Huaishur could not hear him clearly. He could only vaguely make out that he seemed to be saying that there was something behind him. What was it? Huaishur turned around in astonishment, and then saw the black shadow of the giant rhinoceros rapidly enlarging in front of his eyes with a roar that broke through the air. Boom! With a loud bang, Huaishur flew backward. With a thud, he smashed into the wall and could not be pulled out. There were sounds of sneering from all around. The giant beasts watching on the city wall fell into silence. In the dead silence, someone let out a helpless sigh. What are you doing? If you can't do it, then don't send me off. Then, in the deep valley, a shrill scream rang out. But the sound did not come from Huaishur. It came from the giant rhinoceros? Right where it was, the giant rhinoceros covered in rock armor let out a tragic roar and staggered back. It was only now that it felt a deep pain coming from the tip of its nose. On the bridge of its nose, the two sharp horns had been broken off. It crashed into Huaishur's carapace and shattered it. Are you an idiot? Huaishur, who was embedded in the city wall, pulled himself out as if nothing had happened. He twisted his sore waist, turned around, and looked at the huge crack on the carapace at his waist. It was as if he had been hit by a train. The crystallization of metallurgy created by the alchemy fire in his soul, the high-density alloy armor, had two cracks. It was not easy. Although Huaishur certainly did not have the skill to do the molecular-level operation of the original technology, under the rough production, the performance was barely half of the original product. Seeing the cracks on the armor, Huaishur did not feel distressed. He raised his head, took a breath, and then with a hutue sound, spat out a mouthful of molten iron to seal the cracks. Come, let's continue. After being hit by the impact that was comparable to a cannonball, Huaishur staggered up as if nothing had happened and grinned at the giant rhinoceros not far away. "You just had a good time, now it's my turn, right?" The giant rhinoceros staggered back in disbelief. It could not believe that Huaishur was still alive and kicking. Even if there was armor, the internal organs inside should have been rotten into a pile of smelly sauce. How could he still get up? Huaishur was too lazy to explain to it the buffer layer technology, the thick internal fat, and the internal organs that could even digest metal. Knowledge is power. Do you understand? The wolf beast said shamelessly. In the next moment, its 4 limbs trampled on the mud. A roar burst forth, and the earth suddenly shook. The soft mud seemed to be stronger than steel under its trampling. It was only after he broke through the air that he weakly whined and flew in all directions. Violent ripples were set off from the blood and mud. The hurricane roared and broke out, and then it was torn apart by Huaishur's sharp claws. The giant rhinoceros suddenly retreated. Without any warning, its speed was fast, but Huaishur was even faster. Under the unreasonable giant beast's physique, his 4 limbs instantly burst forth with the 4 steps of you, as if 4 jet engines were installed. The iron-cast wolf head hung down, revealing the 2 sharp horns, and brazenly crashed forward. Dog escape secret skill, iron head. Boom! Waves of air burst forth. The giant beast's collision set off a huge wave, and with a roar it burst out in all directions. The rhinoceros screamed and was sent flying, rolling in the mud like a sausage rolling on the ground. It smashed into the square formation of the kobolds and crushed a large number of Huaishur's family members. Huaishur also stood in place. He was stunned. "How brave are you?" Fu Yi, who was in the bell, was already shaking so much that she was about to vomit. "Aren't you afraid of a concussion?" After a long time, Huaishur finally reacted. The darkness in front of his eyes faded, and he spat out a mouthful of saliva. He actually saw a trace of blood. Only now did he remember that the effect of force was mutual. No matter how iron the dog's head was, it couldn't withstand his headbutt. If his bones were a little more brittle, he would have simply died on the spot. After a low whine, the rhinoceros actually got up from the ground again. However, 2 bloody holes had appeared on his skin. A few bones were broken, but it was not a serious injury. Looking at Huaishur's sorry state, it grinned and laughed mockingly. "What's wrong? Idiot, don't you like to crash? Come on." Its 4 hooves dug into the ground and regrouped. It lowered its head towards Huaishur and made a charging posture. "If you don't come over," 2 streams of thick air came out of its nostrils. Its eyes were blood-red, and it grinned hideously. "Then I'll go over." With a roar, it launched a fearless charge towards Huaishur again. Last time, it underestimated Huaishur's strength. This time, even if it had to crash, it would crash Huaishur into their wall. The hurricane howled and a loud roar sounded. But Huaishur seemed to be stunned. He stood in place without moving, as if waiting for it to crash into him. Only at the last moment did he grin and smile evilly. "Who wants to compete with a free player like you?" The wolf beast howled to the sky. "Sword, come." Inside the bell, Fu Yi sighed helplessly and waved her claws. On the city wall, the iron pile that Huaishur had thrown to the ground suddenly shook. Then, it split from the middle to the sides, revealing the heavy and ferocious cold blade. The snake spine épée, which was made of the spine of a giant snake and steel, suddenly shook. As if responding to its master's call, it soared into the sky and whistled towards Huaishur. The strangely long blade swept around. As Huaishur opened his mouth and bit the hilt, the brutal long blade extended from Huaishur's mouth to the right. Facing the charging rhinoceros, Huaishur brazenly swung his sword. The giant rhinoceros passed by. Tragic screams could be heard. Blood soared into the sky, almost drenching most of the city wall behind Huaishur's scarlet. The giant rhinoceros had already crashed into the wall with a bang. From his face to his back, a deep slash mark appeared. In the dead silence, the giant beasts on the city walls were dumbfounded. The three questions in life surfaced in their mind. What's going on? What the hell is this? What did you do? What the F***ck is this sword? Aren't we in the monster world? You're making a fool of yourself, bro. Moreover, where the F***ck did you get the sword control technique? On the opposite side, the Emperor Penguin, Twin Moons, who was the first to react, frowned. That guy has psychokinesis. Everyone, be careful. Mental power. Among the many transformations of the remains, only a few could awaken this ability. However, all of them were strange and terrifying. However, the exotic beasts that awaken mental power were usually the type with weak bodies. Where the F***ck did such a detestable big boss pop out from? Why sure had been strengthening the sealing hand day and night. The seemingly crude snake spine sword had long been strengthened to +13. Under the bone-like exterior, it had been infiltrated by molten iron. The alloy had fused with the mutated bones from the outside, and there was no distinction between them. Instead of saying that it was a snake bone, it would be better to say that it was a new alloy forged from snake bones. As for the blade, Huai sure secretly attached the sacrificial knife to it. After attaching the blood-sucking attribute, the blade was boundlessly fast. Amidst the wailing, the giant rhinoceros slowly got up. It raised its huge bloodshot eyes and stared at Huaishur. With a roar, it charged again. However, its speed became slower and slower. In the end, it no longer had any strength. It slid into the mud and stopped in front of Huaishur. It lost its breath. It was dead. In the dead silence, Huaishur held the sword in his mouth, and could not help but look up to the sky and sigh. Being able to die under my soaring heavens dragon flash is a blessing that you've cultivated in your previous life. A gentle breeze blew past. The expert was lonely. A line of saliva leaked out from the corner of his mouth. Chapter 343. Perhaps the visual impact of the sword manipulation technique was too strong, but after the giant rhinoceros disappeared, everyone froze in place and didn't speak. In the dead silence, only the wolf beast with the demeanor of a master stood in place with its head held high. Bathed in the bloody wind, drooling, the scene was particularly strange. No one knew the helpless conversation that only existed in the consciousness. Fu-Yi, don't you think it's too much to steal my kill like this? Oh, it was too close so I couldn't help but break it. Don't do this again. Fu-Yi rolled her eyes and said in a trembling voice, I'll steal the next one too. Okay, I'll give them all to you. Life wasn't easy. Huaishur sighed. Anyway, it wasn't the first time that his kill had been stolen, and he had long been used to it. The problem now was, where could he find another one? Hey, is anyone there? He raised his head and looked at the opposite city wall. How about another one? In the silence, the giant beasts looked coldly at the husky below, and no one spoke. Who knew if this thing hid a rocket launcher called Doghead Dragonflash in addition to the big sword called Heavenly Soaring Dragonflash? Those who played tactics had dirty hearts. The eternal battle had just begun, and no one was willing to go down and lay down before seeing the other side's details. Thus, the husky became more and more proud. It casually spat out the sword in its mouth, stretched its neck, and shouted 3 times, Who dares to kill me? Who dares to kill me? Who dares to kill me? Fu-Yi couldn't help but cover her face in the bell. You might as well shout, I'm still brave and courageous. That's right. Huaishur's eyes lit up. Red hair among men, Lu Bu among dogs. How could he not be Lu Bu? Be careful, this is called White Gate Tower. I beg you, can you change to a more normal style? But why aren't they coming down? Huaishur sighed and looked around. Under those cold gazes, he tilted his head and thought for a while, then suddenly said, Why don't I perform for everyone? How about singing a song? Enough! On top of the city wall, an amber crocodile lying on the edge finally couldn't take it anymore. It opened its mouth and said, since that embarrassing thing over there doesn't want to fight, why don't we just do it over here? From her voice, she seemed to be a domineering big sister. Danny, don't worry. Below the city wall, behind the slowly rising city gate, an old voice rang out, "Let this old man meet it." Accompanied by a hoarse voice, a vigorous figure slowly appeared behind the open city gate, reflecting a golden light. At that moment, Huaisher froze in place. This distinctive yellow and white coat color, bright short hair, and curly tail. It was actually Huaisher's family. But then again, isn't this just firewood? The giant wolf beast's face twitched, and its eyes widened. It crouched down and scrutinized the rather calm senior. "What happened to you, old man? Can you get me one too?" Old Chai's face twitched, and for a moment, he couldn't tell whether Huaisher was envious or mocking him. Can I touch your tail?" Huaisher blinked and raised its paw. "It's really cute swaying here and there." Enough. The Shiba Inu was furious, and its old voice was full of uncontrollable anger. "Don't you know how to respect your seniors? But you're really cute." The giant husky raised its paw and patted Old Chai's head. "We're both dogs. What's wrong with letting me touch you?" Bang! The sharp sound of steel colliding burst forth. Huaisher's vision blurred. He only felt a flash of lightning, and a deep scratch appeared on the scales and carapace on his neck. The Shiba Inu, with rising lightning, stood behind Huaisher and said indifferently, "Next time, it won't be at the level of greeting. Kid, pick up your sword." It was so fast. Huaisher turned back in surprise and looked at the Shiba Inu, who seemed to be wearing lightning clothes. "Why do both of you have skills?" Both humans and ghosts were showing off. He was the only one who could do nothing except spitting everywhere. Wasn't it too much? He waved his tail, which was like a long whip with sharp edges and corners, lightly wrapped around the hilt of the sword. He pulled it out and waved it twice, bursting out a sharp whistling sound. This was the real use of the sword. After all, it was too troublesome to hold it with the mouth, and it was easy to drool, which was really not in line with Huaisher's expected demeanor of a master. In the quagmire, Huaisher took a deep breath and moved his muscles and bones. The scales rubbed together like steel. In the burst of sparks, the sharp sound rose one after another, but it couldn't cover the low sound of bones stretching. The Shiba Inu was stunned for a moment, as if it was an illusion. The wolf beast in front of him seemed to be a little bigger. Where did this monster come from? Could it grow taller just by drinking the wind? What kind of remains did it use, and how many transformations did it undergo to strengthen to such a degree? Generally speaking, after the transformation, the giant beasts would develop different specialties according to the different attributes of the remains and the direction of their own development. They would either become bigger, harder, faster, or have the ability to use all kinds of source substances. Even the more strange power like psychokinesis could develop with the development of special organs. But where did this hexagonal warrior come from? Its body was as big as a heavy truck, and its strength was terrifying. Its physique was strong enough to withstand the impact of the giant rhinoceros, and its defense was even exaggerated and scary. Just now, it was ready to directly cut Huaisher's throat with its speed and lightning attack, which it was most proud of, when Huaisher wasn't paying attention. But after the attack, it found that even the weakest part of this guy was covered with a layer of dense scales, not to mention the greenish-gray skin below that was shining with a metallic light. It was a giant wolf made of metal. Could it be the work of a creator? Shiba Inu thought quickly and suddenly understood. If the explorers were tools, then the creator was the true controller of these tools, as well as the main driving force of this Night of the Witches. He was the one who really played a game with the creator who created the Witches' Night. These days, he had seen many explorers who had been modified and experimented by the creators outside the realm. Among them, there were many tragic failures and monsters that were directly eroded and solidified by the abyss during the transformation. But those who succeeded all had incredible powers and specialties, far surpassing other explorers who relied on their instincts to transform randomly. If this guy in front of him was a spokesperson specially created by a creator, it made sense. "Hey, sir," a curious voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "What are you thinking about?" For a moment, Shiba Inu was horrified. The giant wolf beast in the distance broke through the air in an instant and came in front of him, close at hand. It tilted its head curiously and looked at his absent-minded face, which made his hair stand on end. "Why would I let my imagination run wild when I'm facing the enemy? I've actually overlooked the enemy." It swiftly retreated like a bolt of lightning, widening the distance between them once more. Then, it abruptly lunged forward. In the blink of an eye, it was as if a blinding bolt of lightning had drawn a sharp edge in the void. It stared straight at Huaishi's eyes. He only needed one strike to cripple this dog's eyes. But if I kill it, will I incur the wrath of the Creator? The sudden thought in his mind made his movements slow down for a moment. Then, he felt a sharp pain in his claws as if he had hit an iron wall. Because Huaishi closed his eyes. It was like a fly hitting a glass. There wasn't even a light sound. Even the hardness of his eyelids was like armor? He was shocked, but the electric light on his body became more and more violent, and he attacked Huaishi again. Since the speed just now was not enough, he would speed up again. Boom! The hurricane roared. Before Shiba Inu could take any action, the wolf beast stepped through the air and whistled. Even without the acceleration of the lightning, it caught up with Shiba Inu's speed. How could it be so fast? Shiba Inu was terrified and tried to fight back, but suddenly a strange idea came to his mind. What should I eat tonight? No, it doesn't matter what I eat tonight, right? It's all meat anyway. But is it because I've been eating too much meat recently, so it's not suitable for my health? Maybe I should eat vegetables occasionally? But is there really fresh vegetables in this place? Speaking of which, didn't those people in the underground world combine plants and creatures in the abyss? I wonder how it's going. No, why am I thinking about this? When he came to his senses, he saw Huaishi turn around elegantly, kicking the ground with his front legs, and swinging his body out, together with the sharp sword hanging on his tail. The iron light flashed, and the whistling wind sounded like the roar of a banshee. Shiba Inu rolled into the quagmire awkwardly, gasping for breath. Just a little bit more and I would have been cut in half by the sword that was bigger than me. If it was outside, how could he be afraid of something like this? It was just steel. But how did they make such pure steel? Could it be that they also knew metallurgy? Or did he use some other method? There is no coal here. I should have explored this place. Only beast blood and a few kinds of oily plants can be used as fuel. But how did that guy make an armor? Is he cheating, or is there something I didn't notice? Boom! Shiba Inu flew backward. Being distracted in a battle was obviously suicidal. Even the giant beasts on the city wall noticed that something was wrong. What's going on? Isn't Old Lee from an archaeological team? Seems like he's not in the right state? If it's used well, no one should be able to catch up with its speed. Is he suppressed? Didn't you notice? That guy is probably using psychokinesis, right? As soon as Shuang Yu's voice fell, he suddenly understood. Psychokinesis itself was such a disgusting effect. Even as a sole ability, it only appeared a few times in the sublimator. According to its nature, the way it was performed was completely different. Some added a vector to an object out of thin air, while some seemed to turn the will from invisible to tangible, pulling and moving out of thin air, and so on. There were even more strange and peculiar uses that were impossible to guard against. The deliberately loud voice was also heard by the Shiba Inu under the city wall. Suddenly, the old man was nervous. If used properly, at such a close distance, even his heart could be crushed from the inside. That guy didn't seem to notice. No, is it difficult to perform such a precise operation, or is he deliberately teasing me? No, if it's just psychokinesis. His mind was racing. Suddenly, he caught a glimmer of light from the countless surging thoughts. This is a soul attack. He's controlling my consciousness and thoughts. The momentary delay caused by the horror slowed him down for a moment. Then, under Huai Shi's sharp claws, he flew backward, blood spurting from his mouth and nose. He was seriously injured. But the physical injury was incomparable to the impact on his soul. His heart was cold. A giant beast that was almost a hexagonal warrior was good at soul attack. That's terrifying. It didn't matter even if he died here. He had to tell everyone in midair. He made up his mind. Enduring the pain, he turned around, jumped up, and dodged Huai Shi's pouncing. He flexibly propped himself up with his claws on his back, jumped, and shouted at his companions on the city wall not far away. Everyone, listen to me! The Shiba Inu stared and roared with all his might, shouting words that even he couldn't understand. We are all dogs. Second hint, you can't tell Fu Yi's secret. Chapter 344. Suddenly, the Shiba Inu ascended to the sky and made a deafening announcement. Dead silence followed. On the city wall, all the giant beasts looked at each other, confused. Was the dog barking? Although it was indeed a dog barking, why did it suddenly jump up and bark at everyone? Was it just to scold them? Was it trying to take revenge on the world after being single for so long? Not only were the people on the city wall confused, but even the Shiba Inu itself was stunned in midair. Immediately, its heart turned cold. It could no longer make a sound. It looked back at Huai Shi, who was squatting on the ground with its mouth wide open, trying to catch a piece of meat. Its heart was full of despair. Among the lizardmen, Jonathan, the crystalline lizard, had already realized what was going on. However, he was still terrified by the strange power that Fu Yi had displayed. Which creator was controlling the situation behind the scenes? Why was there such an exaggerated power? Thinking of Fu Yi's small body size, he became more and more confused. Living creatures had their limits. Such an extreme way of adding points meant that she had to rely on her teammate. Otherwise, anyone present would have to leave immediately after a simple attack. Then, Huai Shi had to guard against others attacking Fu Yi. Perhaps some people from the astronomy club had already realized what was going on. After all, this kind of thing only needed to take a look at the map. He looked down at the map on the plug-in and froze in place. Immediately, for the first time, he realized that lizard men could sweat. Cold sweat. What the hell? Jonathan sucked in a breath of cold air. He couldn't see Fu Yi's name. She had disappeared from the astronomy club's map. When did it start? He didn't notice it at all. He had clearly seen it this morning. No, if he looked carefully, there seemed to be a layer of translucent handwriting, but it overlapped under Huai Shi's name. The two people were too close. The size of the map was limited. This kind of cheating plug-in couldn't be convenient enough to adjust the scale at will. As a result, when Fu Yi's translucent name overlapped with Huai Shi's, no one could imagine that the layer of blurry pattern below actually represented another explorer. But what did this mean? White names represented ordinary explorers, light green names represented members of the Astronomy Association, dark green names represented core scholars and explorers who had been given the right to cheat, and black names represented death. But why was it translucent? He fell into confusion. He completely ignored the wailing of the Shiba Inu in the distance. As the wolf beast's iron teeth closed, the Shiba Inu was instantly covered in blood. It didn't know where it got the strength to break free from Huai Shi's 3 or 4 rows of sharp teeth, but its 2 hind legs and tail had been cut off. It looked very miserable. It couldn't help but cry out, "Despicable!" Someone who even copied the emoji pack doesn't have the right to say that. Huai Shi directly spat out the powder and molten iron in front of him, like a heavenly girl scattering flowers in the sky. "You're too shameless. I'm going to punish you on behalf of the legal department." The greatsword swept across. The iron light flashed. Perhaps it was the good brothers of the legal department who bestowed justice from the unseen world. The Shiba Inu was immediately killed. It was clear that it was dead. Then, Huai Shi suddenly felt an indescribable itch in his throat, as if tens of millions of feathers were sweeping around in his throat. He couldn't help but want to dig them out with his claws. He couldn't help but sneeze. There was a boom. A ball of flame mixed with sparks was spewed out. With the bad breath of not brushing teeth for a long time, it spread around and formed a vague outline in the air. Well, it looked like a lion. It was on fire, as if it had been ignited, and it was screaming, F***ck, it's real. Huai Shi was startled. He didn't know why he could sneeze out a lion. Oh my God! Did he become a piccolo who vomited to give birth? Then, the lion's eyes were no longer restrained. It suddenly pounced on Huai Shi. Hiding here, he planned to take advantage of the battle between the giant wolf and the Shiba Inu to injure both of them, and then take advantage of the situation. He didn't expect that Huai Shi would sneeze at him. But now he had entered his attack range. At the moment when Huai Shi was stunned, the lion suddenly opened its mouth. A shadow of a giant mouth appeared in the air and fell on Huai Shi. It suddenly closed. It was so close. The lion was furious and couldn't believe it. At the moment when its giant mouth closed, it seemed to have bitten a small stone. It was blocked by an invisible barrier for a moment, and then Huai Shi pulled away. And in the place where the shadow of the giant mouth covered, there was a deep depression in the ground. In the depression, whether it was stones, plants, mushrooms, rhinoceros wreckage, or even mud, they were all perfectly cut into a hemispherical shape. The cut was as smooth as a mirror. Huai Shi's face was deformed. Envious, why don't I have such a cool trick? He raised his lemon-red eyes and stared at the stunned lion. Then, Huai Shi took a deep breath. He spat out the sourness of the lemon in his heart, the fear of escaping death, and the last trace of itchiness in his throat. A dazzling white light spewed out from his mouth. It was iron. Burning iron. The originally sticky molten iron turned into a dazzling molten iron mist, which was difficult to look at directly, and swept out from Huai Shi's mouth. In an instant, the rich hot silver light swallowed the lion. The scream burst out suddenly and stopped abruptly. When a gust of wind swept away the rapidly condensing red iron sand, only the charred corpse of the lion was left. Oh my God! Huai Shi was overjoyed. Foo-ee, did you see that? I have a new skill. It's so cool. It's my turn to be the emperor this year. I finally have a new skill. After a long time of brewing, through the unreasonable method of fighting, Huai Shi's spitting organ in his throat finally developed. The brand new organ hidden behind the tonsils had been connected to Huai Shi's blood circulation. It could extract his blood, which had mutated to liquid metal, at any time. After a series of unknown chemical reactions, it would instantly evaporate into boiling iron mist. Together with the spitting, it would form a strong thermite-like metal breath. This was much cooler than the original spitting to kill the enemy. Huai Shi's tail swung wildly in excitement, swinging the big sword like an electric fan. Then, he felt the ominous gazes around him. The premonition of death suddenly emerged. The moment the Shiba Inu died and the invisible lion was exposed, several swift figures flew out from the various city gates. The great spirits of several countries descended on the battlefield at the same time and launched a brazen attack on Huai Shi. Level 3 fighting strength so terrifying, this kid must not be allowed to live. Allowing a hexagonal warrior to continue to grow stronger on such a suitable battlefield for evolution was not good news for other countries. Under the secret connection of the two moons, not only did they incite the invisible lion, but also other giant beasts who were still watching at the same time realized the threat of this giant husky. Perhaps before he could tear down his house, their house would be torn down by Huai Shi. The illusory giant wolf suddenly jumped out from the sudden moonlight and appeared behind Huai Shi. Its claws were like knives as it slashed down. Under the mud, dozens of thick tentacles suddenly popped out, entangling Huai Shi's limbs and blocking the lethal big sword. Countless insects spurted out like a thick fog from the open city gate, with strong acid dripping from their mouths, directly enveloping everything. A giant crystal spider fell from the sky, its 8 claws piercing into the ground. Then, with a hiss, countless crystal blades crazily protruded from the ground, and before that, Huai Shi's roar was faster than them. How many floors does a bag of rice have to be carried? Along with the wolf's roar, Jonathan, who had been paddling on the city wall for a long time, finally received the pre-agreed secret signal. The crystal lizard suddenly floated in the air, hovering above the sky. Its short and slightly funny claws spread out from its bloated body to both sides. The blood that had turned into a magnetic fluid rushed rapidly, bursting with power from the mutated organ in its chest that was like a giant magnet, interfering with the geomagnetic field. The earth roared. Countless stones whistled and flew into the sky. Without any leeway, it soared to the limit that he could bear in an instant. Amidst the roar that shook the earth, the magnetic field and gravity became chaotic, like the undercurrents in the deep sea, rubbing against each other and bursting into dazzling sparks in the void. Going bankrupt in one wave. That power did not act on other people, but directly applied on Huai Shi's body. In an instant, the huge pressure almost flattened him. Countless scales rubbed against each other, bursting with sparks and sharp sounds. And Huai Shi had already dragged the stone octopus that entangled him underground into the air, flying into the sky along with countless boulders. Before the giant octopus that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws screamed, it saw a strange smile on Huai Shi's dog head underground. Huai Shi took a deep breath. Dog's breath, stage 3. Incandescent silver boiling metal spewed out from Huai Shi's mouth, and under Fu Yi's psychokinesis, it turned into a bunch of hot molten iron knives. As Huai Shi shook his head wildly, it swept in all directions. Wherever the high-pressure water cannon-like torrent of metal mist passed, everything was neatly cut into 2 pieces. The octopus that entangled Huai Shi was directly cut into pieces, and the terrifying residual heat that spread to the surroundings instantly tore the insects apart, stirred, and evaporated into ashes. The encirclement fell apart in an instant. Huai Shi casually grabbed Jonathan, who was exhausted from the air, and threw him back on the city wall. The great spirits of the lizard men finally reacted and roared angrily into the battlefield. The chaotic battle began. The tragic drama of the eternal war finally played out at this moment. Chapter 345. It was as if an empty football field had suddenly become crowded with people. Nearly 70 to 80 giant beasts instantly filled up the entire crevice. Amidst the rumbling, huge tremors that shook the earth and mountains continuously burst forth. As far as the eye could see, there were ferocious and tragic battles everywhere. Why did they suddenly start fighting? As the instigator of the war, a certain canine creature had no idea. Then, he realized that he seemed to have been blocked by all the group members. It was like a graduation ball in Rome. Amidst the melodious melody, the students had already danced together, and then there was only a damned otaku who couldn't even find a single female classmate. He looked around in a daze amidst the hustle and bustle. No one paid attention to him. He quickly went from being popular to being ignored. Such a complicated mental journey made Huai Shi a little stunned. Why didn't anyone come to me? Even when he went to help, he was forced to retreat by the disdainful and resistant gazes of his teammate. Dogs with human heads were not welcomed anywhere. When a giant husky leisurely wandered on the battlefield and looked around in a daze, he suddenly heard the sharp sound of wind in his ears. Huai Shi subconsciously tilted his head. He skillfully avoided the murderous intent that was close at hand under the premonition of death. Then, amidst the sharp sound of steel rubbing against each other, a tragic gap appeared on Huai Shi's sharp horn on his forehead. It was almost broken, The roar of something breaking through the air only burst forth now. Amidst the howling wind, an arrow made of sharpened bone dug a gap on Huai Shi's sharp horn and wedged itself deeply into the wall beside him, leaving behind a crack that was as thick as a thumb. It was bottomless. When Huai Shi suddenly turned around, he did not see the archer's shadow. Instead, he heard a scream. It was the painful roar of the armored groundhog. It was filled with disbelief and despair. Under the watchful eyes of everyone on the battlefield, the gray owl that was fighting against it suddenly trembled. Bathed in blood, it laughed maniacally as it welcomed its evolution. But this evolution quickly turned ecstasy into shock, and in the end, it turned into a wail. Like an inflated balloon, the iron-gray giant owl rapidly expanded. Its feathers stood up, but the skin and muscles below quickly deformed and twisted. It was as if he was being parasitized by something strange. The feathers on the upper half of his body quickly fell off. Then, under the twisted and shriveled skin, pustules and stripes that resembled twisted faces appeared. Layer after layer of keratin grew out from the cracked skin, and in the blood, slender mycelium grew rapidly, as if it was absorbing the blood and spreading. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a monster with half a deformed owl and the other half covered in strange mottled fungi. A chilling abyssal precipitate rose from its body. Solidification. In an instant, everyone on the battlefield dodged to the side in horror. The solidification from hell had appeared on the explorer. Finally, someone had paid the price for failing to evolve. Ever since the evolution of his bloodline, the hidden dangers and flaws in his bloodline had been triggered, either by his own will or by the creator behind him. The flaw hidden behind the evolutionary tree led to the fall. When the soul was pulled into the darkness by the abyss, the alarm system from the Astronomers' Association had already ejected the explorer's consciousness, replaced by a twisted bestial spirit that resembled a native corruption species of hell. And the jaw-dropping aberration had just begun. As wisps of dark aura rose from the soil, the fungus giant owl's body began another round of hellish evolution. It was as if something parasitic in its body had awakened and broken out of its shell. A few holes suddenly appeared on its rigid body, and a messy chitin exoskeleton flowed out from within. The pale white bones shrouded the giant owl, twisting and growing. It ushered in a second and third metamorphosis. It leaped on the evolutionary tree without any hesitation. It had obtained a tremendous amount of power from the taboo. Apart from the pair of wings covered in fungus and face stripes, the other two pairs of bony wings broke out from its back. Its deformed figure became illusory. As if shrouded in a thick fog on its back, a tentacle shot out without warning, and in the sky, a griffin that was flying freely was pulled down without warning and fell to the ground. Then, the aberrated corrosive species pounced on him and did whatever it wanted, venting the thirst and greed in its heart. Get rid of it quickly! In the distance, the emperor penguin, twin moons, roared anxiously, "Don't let the aberrations spread." Following its words, many great spirits had already cast their gazes over from their battle, choosing to stop fighting at the same time and rushing over. Then, the deformed giant owl's scarlet eyes looked at Huai Shi, who had an innocent expression on his face. It bared its teeth hungrily and let out a sharp cry. Then, the great spirits that rushed over turned back at the same time, coldly withdrawing their gazes and continuing their original battle. It was as if it was just an intermission. No. Why are you guys like this? Huai Shi, who felt the cold shoulder of the group members, raised his head in surprise. Shouldn't everyone be working together to fight against the enemy? Do your best. Someone from somewhere cheered loudly. Kill it! You have to believe in yourself, you can do it. His tone was full of enthusiasm and anticipation, but it was not clear whether he was cheering for Huai Shi or the corruption species. In the shrill cry that resembled a strange laugh, the deformed giant owl spread its wings, and the striped faces on the three pairs of wings all showed a ferocious expression. Feeling everyone's encouragement and anticipation, the corruption species hungrily pounced on the pitiful, weak, helpless, and edible giant husky. Then, they heard the crisp sound of Biagi. The deformed giant owl that pounced on Huaishur crashed into the sharp scales of Huaishur, as if it had crashed into an iron wall. Its originally swift speed turned into a huge impact, and its entire body was plastered on the sharp scales. Huaishur felt as if he had been punched. Yes, through the bulletproof vest. Just as Huaishur raised his claws and slammed them down, the giant owl's figure suddenly flashed, disappearing from the spot, and abruptly appearing dozens of meters away. It was as if it had jumped through space. Huaishur turned around and spat at the place where he had just hit. After the blazing heat, the pus and bacteria on the scales instantly disappeared without a trace, and there was no hidden infection. "Be careful, my psychokinesis has no effect." Fu Yi's voice rang in his ear. "The plugin says that the effect of this skill is called phase kick or something, phase shift?" Huaishur was dumbfounded when she heard this. Was it that high-end? Compared to this, his metal spit was so low-level that it could pierce through the Earth's core. Why was the core technology mastered by others? Then, the deformed giant owl shook again and disappeared from the spot. Huaishur's head was hit by the sound of wind. Bang! The sharp end of the tentacle smashed into Huaishur's throat, and through the thick scales and carapace, it brought a faint impact. HP 1 for Brother Owl's sake, a drop of blood was deducted. It did not break through the defense at all. Even the giant owl that had turned into a beast was stunned in place, in disbelief. Immediately, he saw the wolf beast turn its head impatiently and glance at him from the corner of its eyes. "What's the use of doing all this fancy stuff all the time?" The steel tail swept across like an iron whip with a low whistling sound. The blade slashed down, almost breaking the speed of sound. Before the giant owl could react, the tentacle was directly cut open from the middle. One turned into two. How nice! But then, Huaishur's decapitation strike actually encountered an obstacle. The hidden arrow that came out of nowhere appeared again, blocking the blade for a moment, allowing the giant owl to calmly phase shift again, appearing on the other side and launching a fierce attack. This time, Huaishur finally felt pain. Through the intact scales and carapace, his attack actually directly affected the inside of Huaishur's body, causing the giant wolf beast to twitch and growl in pain. But when he focused on looking for it, the hidden arrow disappeared without a trace again. He could only hear an illusory mocking chuckle. This was clearly a trap for Huaishur, hoping that he and the corrosive species would both suffer. No, it would be even better if they both died together. Sensing the cold, mocking gazes of the great spirits around him, Huaishur spat and then opened his mouth, his sharp teeth scraping against the heavy blade. Fiery sparks that made the corners of people's eyes twitched constantly flew from the blade. The sharp sound of steel scraping against each other pierced the clamor of the battlefield. It was as if he was sharpening a blade. The hand of confinement attached the power of the fury axe to one end, and then attached the power of the spear of compassion to the other end. The double-edged sword lit up with a cold, steel light. It was thanks to such a large body that Huaishur had the luxury of origin substances to squander. Finally, Huaishur spat out a mouthful of molten iron and smeared it on the blade, burning it until it was bright red. Attribute damage addition complete. Laughing at me, huh? He grinned mockingly and looked around. Finally, his gaze fell on the giant owl that had sensed the danger. He suddenly asked, "Do you know that in the idiom, 'do whatever you want,' there is another way to make you invincible?" The giant owl had no idea that the giant husky was talking about the three little ones, but the bone-piercing sense of danger was getting stronger. Then, it saw the giant wolf slowly lower its body, as if accumulating strength. Its muscles contracted, causing the heat under its scales to rise like an oven. It grinned ferociously and smiled at it. "That is..." A deafening sound suddenly burst forth. The fourfold acceleration of Yu's steps burst forth from the giant wolf's unreasonable muscles. Its four limbs instantly trampled on the ground, leaving deep depressions. The giant wolf had also broken through the sound barrier and suddenly appeared. It was already close at hand, and a cold whisper sounded in the giant owl's ears. "One is worth two." Instinctively, the giant owl screamed and used phase jump again. Before the giant sword could cut it in half, a broken bone wing and a small part of its body fell from the sky, and its figure had already disappeared. 8 o'clock. Fu Yi's voice sounded in Huai Shi's consciousness at the right time. Then, the giant wolf that was running forward turned without warning. It pounced at the confused giant owl hundreds of meters away. "You want to leave after offending the prince?" Chapter 346. Tai Hui, who was galloping in the air, outlined a sharp angle. Relying on his own exaggerated muscle strength and Yu steps, he trampled on the common sense of physics in an unscientific manner. In an instant, he bore the pressure of nearly double the acceleration and shot backward. He pounced straight at the giant owl that had just flashed out of the air. His speed didn't slow down at all. In fact, relying on the momentum of breaking through the original inertia, his speed exploded again, faster than before. Charging or retreating as the process of accumulating momentum, this was the perfect U-steps technique. Crow rides a plane. In the reflection of the giant owl's suddenly contracted pupils, Huai Shi's long tail swayed. The giant sword tore through the air, bursting with a burning brilliance. As the wolf beast roared, it slashed down again. "Embarrassing, leave the group." "Drummer." The heavenly drum in the void seemed to have been beaten in an instant, bursting with thunder. Purely relying on his unreasonable muscle strength, Huai Shi's rough technique actually burst forth with astonishing explosive power comparable to Elder Luo's. The strength of his whole body was superimposed on the sword, causing the sword to instantly vibrate like a bee's wings. It swept past. The mutated giant owl froze in place. It lowered its head in shock, and found that it seemed to be intact. Could it be that the phase jump just now was successful? Immediately after, it noticed a thick smell of iron emerging from its lungs when it breathed. From its mouth and nose, a sharp iron light burst forth and spread out from the inside out. It exploded out of thin air. Blood spurted out from the body that was riddled with holes, dyeing the entire giant wolf blood red. One-hit kill. Then, a hidden arrow suddenly came out of nowhere. Just as Huai Shi was about to achieve victory, the arrows hidden in the darkness silently burst forth, perfectly taking advantage of his momentary lapse in concentration. After accumulating strength for an unknown period of time, the arrow tore through Huai Shi's scales like a hot knife through butter and nailed deep into his neck. It was very close to Huai Shi's carotid artery. Well, it was about 20 centimeters away. It was just the distance of a Xinyue member. What a pity! The blood-soaked ferocious wolf beast had already sensed the origin of the hidden arrow. The hidden arrow hanging from its neck turned around indifferently and looked at the other side of the battlefield, at the centaur that thought it had succeeded. Huai Shi grinned and revealed a kind smile. His lips opened and closed as he silently greeted it. "I saw you." In the blink of an eye, the gigantic centaur was terrified and turned to flee into the city behind it. A group of elves with pointy ears and covered in armor hid it behind the formation, providing cover for it without regard for their own safety. But no matter how he thought about it, he would probably be defeated by the giant wolf, right? The centaur didn't care how many of them died. It didn't even care if they all died. It just wanted to escape because the bone-chilling cold was getting closer and closer. Throwing away the cumbersome giant iron bow, it ran with all its might towards the open city gate in front of it. As long as it escaped inside, it would be safe. However, a scream suddenly sounded behind him. Then, it suddenly disappeared. It was so fast. What replaced it was a dead silence. A chill that erupted from his consciousness froze him in place, making him unable to move. He felt fear crawl up his spine like a crawling insect. Then, a chilling greeting sounded in its ears. "Sister," a wolf head poked out from behind its arm. Its eyes, which were the size of a human head, glanced at it and said with interest, "Who are you sniping?" "Why sure, we're all from the astronomy club. We're on the same side. Don't do it." At the critical moment, the Emperor's penguin, Twin Moons, finally rushed over and said anxiously, "Don't kill her. I can give you key information in exchange." Several big spirits followed closely behind. The giant beast's murderous intent locked onto Huaishur, forcing him to make a decision. "What information? I'm quite interested." Huaishur looked back at him and seemed to have changed his mind. He grinned and smiled. "But I prefer to kill my own people." Twin Moon's expression changed instantly. He activated his psychokinesis and fought with Fu Yi in the void, but it was too late. Huaishur took a deep breath. Snitch's breath to stage 9. Metal breath. The terrifying breath, which was one of the most powerful skills of all explorers, instantly drowned the centaur and turned her into a charred corpse covered in a metal film. She didn't even have time to scream. Then, blood spurted out from Huaishur's body. He roared into the sky. In this short period of time, Huaishur had once again ushered in an evolution. In a moment of trance, darkness suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. It was as if a crack leading to the abyss had opened in front of him. Pairs of malicious eyes stared at Huaishur. Wherever his gaze passed, deep resentment and darkness appeared from Huaishur's soul, inflicting distortion. A huge amount of despair, pain, and madness poured into Huaishur's soul. Burp, Huaishur moaned comfortably and stared at the abyss expectantly. "Is there more?" "Majimoto." The countless pairs of eyes in the abyss were stunned for a moment, then looked away awkwardly. "Mom, there's a pervert here." The crack in the void suddenly closed up, as if it had never appeared. Huaishur opened his eyes and heard a series of incessant crackling sounds. On his back and the joints of his limbs, sharp, metal-like blades suddenly popped out, as if he was wearing a metal armor that was full of barbs and sharp blades. A living killing machine. "Hutue!" Huaishur spat on the ground and reached out to flatten it, making a mirror. He looked around and sighed. I've become more handsome again. As expected of me." As he spoke, the huge wolf head slowly raised and looked at the giant beasts around him with a sneer. His gaze fell on Twin Moon's face. "Kid, do you want a mask? It's free." Without saying anything, Twin Moon rose into the air and suddenly shrank behind his teammates. From Huaishur's completely empty skull, he read undisguised ferocity and killing intent, as well as that indescribable malice. It was as if the abyss had opened in front of him. "Do it!" he roared loudly. "Okay." Huaishur nodded. In an instant, he shot through the air, raised his tail, and swung his large sword in a circle, aiming for Twin Moon's skull. Bang! A formless telekinesis forcefully blocked this sword, but the Axe of Wrath's attack on Origin Substance had unquestionably taken effect on his body. It was as if someone had swung a hammer at his head with all their might. Twin Moon fell from the sky. Blood seeped out of his mouth, nose, and eyes. As for his ears... In any case, Huaishur didn't know where a penguin's ears were. Ignoring the attacks of the other giant beasts, Huaishur took advantage of his weakness to take his life. Huaishur once again swung the blade on his tail and slashed. At the critical moment, a giant beast that looked like a pterodactyl raised its wings, blocking the sword like a tower shield. Sparks flew, and the pterodactyl's eyelids twitched wildly. The membrane on its wing was instantly pierced, and a large hole was torn open, as if a piece of craft paper had been pierced. Even worse, it felt as if its blood was being continuously sucked away by that strange large sword, becoming a beautiful embossment and decoration on the sword's spine. It was difficult to breathe. Ignoring the attacks of the giant bull and tiger, Huaishur swung the blade again and slashed. Half of its wing flew into the sky, and the pterodactyl cried out in pain. Huaisher once again sucked in a deep breath. F***ck, why was this bastard's breath cool down so quickly? Everyone retreated in fear, only to see Huaisher burp in satisfaction. He grinned, revealing a mocking smile at them. Don't be afraid, I'm just kidding. The wolf beast stepped forward, using the fourth layer of the Emperor Yu's steps, and the tip of its sword swept horizontally. The winged white tiger instantly let out a mournful cry, and blood spurted out. Immediately afterwards, a formless telekinesis pierced into its eye sockets, directly piercing through its brain. Die. Immediately afterwards, Huaisher was bathed in the white tiger's blood, and he was almost within reach. The pterodactyl roared angrily, spitting out a dark green rain of acid. Even steel began to sizzle under the corrosion of this strong acid. Its open mouth didn't even have time to close before it was forced open by Huaisher. You like to vomit? Huaisher observed its throat and skillfully opened its mouth. He too? Between the iron claws, the pterodactyl's mouth was forcibly closed. The giant beast struggled frantically, and smoke rose from its face. It was really thick smoke, as if its flesh was being burned. When it was thrown to the ground by Huaisher, half of its head was already cooked, emitting a tempting fragrance. It was a pity that there wasn't the crying of the child next door to set off the atmosphere. But it wasn't bad to have a penguin chirping. Huaisher observed Twin Moon's shocked expression with great interest, slowly moving forward step by step. There were other beasts that wanted to come over, but they were forced to retreat by the gaze of the wolf beast. On the huge battlefield, this place was empty. The formless telekinesis pulled the surrounding air, forming sharp spikes, sealing off Twin Moon's space to dodge, forcing it into a desperate situation. Wait a minute, Huaisher, let's make a deal. Twin Moon didn't panic, and it could be said to be fearless in the face of danger. Instead, it said, I'm willing to exchange information about this witch's night as long as you're willing to listen to me. Don't you know about the information about the destructive factor? Oh, the rancher, right? Huaisher stepped forward indifferently. Now that you mention it, I can probably guess it. Don't tell me you want to use this in exchange for your life? Being killed here will only result in me withdrawing. You can't kill me, so what's the point of exchanging my life? Twin Moon replied calmly. If I tell you that it's not just the rancher involved here, do you still plan to continue listening? Huaisher paused for a moment, stunned. This grandson couldn't be fooling him, right? If the abyss evolution theory could be related to the rancher, he would know, but how could the witch's dream involve another destructive factor? There were a total of 24 destructive factors, and one experiment accounted for 2? Were all the creators of the utopia so careless? At that moment, Huaisher suddenly felt a premonition of death activate, and his whole body turned cold. Without hesitation, he turned around and ran straight up the lizardman's city wall. He didn't care about anything and looked around vigilantly. He didn't know where this premonition of death came from. Twin Moon was also stunned. Although it didn't know why Huaisher didn't even want the information and turned around to leave, its first reaction after escaping death was to quickly return to the city. As soon as it took a step, it heard it. A distant song sounded above its head. The heavy chirp was like a song, mellow and hoarse, full of pain and sorrow. A gloomy song was played in the sky. It suddenly descended on the battlefield. Chapter 347. At that moment, the sky cracked, and a huge shadow was reflected on every sluggish face. As the venomous skylight slanted like a torrent, hundreds of huge spots appeared on the scorched and withered land. Those spots swam in the desert, the swamps, the poisonous pools, and even the decaying cities and every terrified face. They gathered into a formation and slowly swam forward amidst the sorrowful and gloomy song. They were gigantic whales. Decaying, expanding, and even growing abnormally, the deformed whales, which were covered in layers of dendrobium, strange eyes and twisted faces revealed their despairingly enormous bodies in the sky. They cried loudly, and their voices overlapped with each other, turning into a vast and desolate song. When they shook their bodies, they set off a whistling hurricane. They just shook off the dust. When the dust fell to the ground, it became a stinking rain. It swallowed up everything in the world. An indescribable precipitate of the abyss dissipated from it, causing the eyes of all the members of the Astronomical Association and the Depth Index on their plugins to jump wildly. Just a few drops fell on Huaishir's body, and his iron armor began to sizzle and rust rapidly, giving him a fright. But soon, a layer of psychokinesis barrier propped up from his body, isolating him from the rain. The great spirits on the battlefield were not so lucky. For a moment they jumped and fled in all directions. Some of them had evolutionary defects or showed signs of being parasitized, and even began to deform on the spot. The scattered herds attracted the attention of the horrifying whales in the sky. Suddenly, the smallest whale swooped down, bringing with it a fishy wind. Huaishir only felt that the hurricane was about to overturn him. As it approached, the sad song changed, becoming like a vicious mockery from the abyss. It was a whale laughing at them. It was laughing at all the ants in the world. It looked at their struggling faces, sympathized with their eventual destruction, and mocked their worthless resistance. Even the smallest whale on the ground had the power to collapse a building when it swooped down. Compared to it, even Huaishir's huge body was as small as a doll. The giant whale rushed into the battlefield, brushing against the wall. With a swing of its long tail, it casually turned half of the city wall into ruins, and gravel flew everywhere. Huaishir and the others frantically retreated. When they finally had a chance to look back, the whale had rushed into the sky again. Only the devastated battlefield was left. The great spirits that were still in the crevice had been reduced by at least half. Countless arrogant giant beasts had been swallowed by the whales, ushering in their destruction. The battle of the eternal world that had just begun came to a temporary end, just like that. In the dead silence, only vicious laughter and sad whale songs gradually faded away. Huaishir stared blankly at the whales that had become small black dots. He lowered his head stiffly and looked at the high priest kneeling beside him, trembling and crying. "What is that?" The bell of destruction, the bell of destruction," the high priest shrieked and cried. "That is the evil creature created by the devil, the herdsman who sowed destruction on the earth. God, is it God who wants to destroy this world? Why do you have to give us such a painful punishment? Are you punishing us for our original sin?" No matter how many times he asked, all he could mutter were scriptures and prayers. Huaishir's patience ran out, but he could not get any useful information. This group of lizardmen was really too much. Great spirits, the sacred beasts that protect the kingdom. A hoarse voice sounded in the ears of every surviving giant beast of the lizardmen. It sounded familiar. That voice sounded like it was dying, and it used up all its strength just to breathe. "Please come to me." Huaishir and the surviving great spirits looked at each other in shock, and finally remembered that it seemed to be the king's voice. They looked at the capital bathed in the vicious rain behind them, and the silent hall. As the door opened with a bang, the giant beasts once again walked into the hall that was full of decadence. But as the curtains were pulled up, everyone was stunned. On the throne, the old man who should have been dying actually recovered a little bit of vitality, and a faint light shone in his turbid eyes. Even though his breathing still carried the muddy sound from his lungs, his complexion was strangely rosy, as if he had eaten to his heart's content. It was completely different from yesterday's decline. Instead, it was as if he had just recovered from a serious illness. He was gradually recovering in the rain of the abyss. This eerie scene made everyone's heart tremble. "I'm sure everyone already knows what exactly happened on the throne," the decrepit old man said bluntly. "I think this country, no, this world, is not going to live for long. The end is coming, and everything will be destroyed. Behind him, on the altar, the eye of the god's skeleton that seemed to be alive trembled slightly, as if it was looking at the faces of every beast. The beast was ferocious. But the war, after a short pause, he gathered his strength and said with difficulty, "The war is not over. The eternal war must continue," he said. It said, "We can't stop struggling either." On the face of the decrepit lizard man, the turbid eyes lit up with a chilling fanaticism. "Even if everything will be destroyed in the destruction." The withered fingers slowly raised and pointed at Huai Shur in the midst of the beasts. "Great Spirit, please come forward. Accept this gift from the gods," said the king. "It is a reward you deserve." Huai Shur's first reaction was to turn around and leave. He felt that there would be no good juice to eat at this time. He was quite clear about his position as a tool man, no, a tool dog. They were just in a cooperative relationship. He could not even stomach it, let alone his heart. At this time, if the other side wanted to do some strange sacrificial ritual and wanted to do something desperate, Huai Shur would not doubt it at all. But after hesitating for a long time, he still walked forward in the end. There was still a good brother here. At most, he would swallow this bastard, take the divine remains, and run away. Would anyone be able to catch up with him? As the wolf beast approached, a pair of cold amber eyes scrutinized the king who was close at hand, guarding against any rash movements. Then, he saw it. The king began to tremble rapidly. As if he had taken drugs, his eyes turned white, and his limbs twitched. Then, with the connection of the blood thread, an increasingly large violent bestial nature emerged from the narrow body. It was as if the will of the divine remains had entered its aged body. It caused the shell that was on the verge of collapse to multiply and change on its own. Countless scales peeled off and regrew. An eyeball exploded with a bang. In the empty eye socket, clusters of nauseating granules wriggled. The aberration of the abyss descended on its body. But it was forcibly calmed down, and a blood-colored crystal the size of a grain of sand appeared in its hand. A sweet aura spread out. It caused all the beasts present to make hungry sounds and their eyes to turn red. In that moment, Huai Shur suddenly understood. He abruptly raised his head and looked at the eyeball on the altar. This was probably the true use of the divine remains, right? The group of idiots who wanted to take the divine remains and run had never thought about why the lizard men dared to place the divine remains in front of them so casually. The entire city, the king and the divine remains had long since been connected. None of them could be missing. The city would collect the origin substance from the abyss and infuse it into the divine remains, while the king would bathe in this excessively violent grace and strip away the aberrated parts of the abyss from his own body. What remained would be the crystallization of the divine grace that would no longer be tainted by the abyss. Now, the king didn't need to do anything. The crystal of divine grace flew up on its own and entered Huai Shur's body. Huai Shur raised his hand, patted it, and stuffed it directly into the bell. The enormous body blocked most of the view. Only the king witnessed everything, but he didn't say anything. He only glanced at Su Chun with a smile that wasn't a smile. Under the wrinkled and broken skin, brand new scales had actually grown. He was coming back from the dead. No, it should be said that from a dying lizard man, he was gradually turning into something else. The moment he truly came back to life, perhaps all the hidden dangers would completely erupt at that time, right? He would become the most powerful beast in this country. At the same time, he would also be the most corrosive species, the representative of the abyss on the surface. He could almost be called the leader of a large group. A leader of a large group in the midst of transformation. This made Huai Shur want to make a move several times, but he couldn't make up his mind. "You have a problem?" the king asked. "What is the purpose of everything you do?" Huai Shur was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he asked, "Or is there really any meaning to it? Since the end of the world was coming, then all of this would be completely destroyed. No matter how much they struggled in vain, there was no meaning to what they were doing. No matter if it was their country, the capital, or this palace, they would all be swept away from the earth when the time came. All of this was just a hasty dream of the Creator. Meaning? The lizard-man king raised the corner of his mouth with difficulty. He seemed to be mocking himself. I thought, ants like us, whether we exist or not is not meaningful at all. What is the meaning? To live? Or to live better, rights? Wealth? Fame? Or perhaps, he would become a supreme existence, leaving a unique monument. Those are all meanings. Great spirits, but for us they are not. He replied with a hoarse voice, existence, for us, existence is the meaning of everything. We want to exist. It said, we will exist. When the old king, who was wandering between aging and death, aberration and evolution, made such a declaration, his turbid eyes burst out with chilling obsession and determination. It said, we will definitely exist. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.